Nah, I got time. Time is what I got.
Time is what we all have, and it's a precious commodity. This is
It
the
is
Harrowings
indeed.
Live podcast, and I've got Skip Healy on with me. We're going to be talking a little bit about his journey, starting as I did also in Fife and Drum years ago. Skip, was that 1965 when you joined up? How did it come about?
1965, 66. Yeah, right around that time. I'm the youngest of five children. First of all, thank you very much, Hal, for having me on, and especially for your support of my fledgling Empty Pockets podcast. Hal made a substantial financial contribution to my podcast through his foundation, and it's very, very much appreciated. Thank you.
Joined snug, right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You gotta get the behind the scenes view. But
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. I haven't actually done much with it yet, but I
mhm.
did see your first couple of podcasts. But take me back to how you came to want to play the fife in the first place.
Okay, I actually did not want to play the fife in the first case.
Oh,
I'm the youngest of five kids, and we had a piano in our house that nobody could play.
mm,
So my mother thought, okay, last chance, let's ship the kid off for piano lessons. That went pretty well for a couple of months, and then it didn't. And in our hometown of my hometown of East Greenwich, Rhode Island, um, we have a very old militia organization called the Kentish Guards, Rhode Island Militia. They were originally chartered on the 29th of October in 1774. I think they're the third or fourth continuously active chartered military organization in the United States. So they decided they wanted to reorganize their fife and drum corps. In their original charter, it was a company of 90 men, I think 90 or 100 men plus musician.
wow.
So that would have meant a fifer and a drummer for cadence and signaling. And so in the mid 60s, a group of men from the militia company decided they wanted to reorganize the fife and drum corps. So my mom said, well, how about this? Do you want to go try that? And I said, can I play the drum? And she said, sure, you just something. Go, get out of the house. Go, go do something. So I went up on Wednesday night with my parents. They said, what's your name? Skip Healy. Where do you live? Union Street. What do you want to do? I want to play the drum. And Mo Shoes, I don't know if you remember Mo from the Kentish Guards, he was sitting at the table and he went, we have enough drummers. This is a fife.
Ah,
So that is
perfect.
how I start. Yep, there you go. That's I got it out special for you.
Thank you. Is that a Cooperman?
That's an old, very, very old Cooper. That's a 1970s vintage Cooperman. Yep.
1992, I think, for this one.
Oh, there you go. So that was the beginning of my voyage into the world of blowing into sticks for a living. Took me about a year to get Yankee Doodle eventually out of the fife. Then came 1968, and we went for the first time to the Deep River Fife and Drum muster. And that's the first time I came to realize other people did this stuff too. Because East Greenwich, Rhode Island is not exactly a traditional hotbed of American fife and drum music. So
Hmm.
that really opened my eyes. I saw some of the old Nathan Hale records that were there from the Nathan Hale Fife and Drum Corps, and they had just and the Deep River Muster had just put out the 1966 Deep River Muster. They made a recording of some of the groups.
Oh, wow.
So, and I found the Wayworn Travelers album sometime around that time. Also, one of the best recordings of small group fife and drum that's ever been done, in my occasion, in my opinion. And I just started listening and listening just obsessively to these albums. And then one day I woke up and I could play like 20 tunes. Just this is what I tell my students. Your improvement comes when you're sleeping, not when you're practicing. Because when you're practicing, you're putting this information into your brain, and your brain's going to chew on this as long as it needs to before it makes sense. And
Wow.
a lot of days you'll wake up the next day and you're able to do something you weren't able to do the day before.
That's amazing. And in 68, when you went to Deep River, was the Colonial Williamsburg Fife and Drum in evidence then?
They could well have been. What the groups I remember the most were the Ancient Mariners and the
Oh,
Connecticut Yanks.
well, you can't miss the Ancient Mariners.
Yeah, they're big and
They're
loud and colorful and screaming and yelling and playing fast. And so I was just like, wow, this drum corps stuff is pretty cool after all. And that just lit my candle, man. There was no holding back after that. Started obsessively playing my fife. I'd come home from school. We had kind of a raised porch on
Mhm.
our house, and I would sit on the top step of the porch and I would just toot away on my fife for hours at a time. My father was a policeman in the town. He was town sergeant, so there weren't any complaints about my playing the fife. And yeah, that just it would playing music has always just been fun for me. I don't think I've ever practiced a minute. I just wanted to play.
Yeah, that's why they call it playing, right?
That's what I call it. That's what I tell my
Yeah.
students. That's why they call it playing, man. Have fun with it.
It brought back to memory to me how I used to practice. We had a poplar tree growing in
Mhm.
back of our house in Birchwood, Virginia, Birchwood neighborhood, Birchwood Gardens in Williamsburg, Virginia. And I would get up in that tree and play. And just down around the corner on Redbud Lane, Herb Watson lived. And do you know Herb?
I
He's
know the name, yeah.
he was a very excellent flautist,
Mhm.
just very talented. And he was also the quartermaster of our corps.
Mhm.
And he later told me at one of our get-togethers behind one of the taverns after the drummers' call weekend that he used to hear that and think, I can't get away from it anywhere.
That's true. It's true. Actually, a really funny thing that happened. I stayed over with my father, sleeping in the back of the station wagon at the muster
Hmm.
in Deep
Oh
River.
yeah,
So there was the whole jam session, and in those days there were three jam sessions in Deep River. There was at the muster field, there was down the road at Swede Hall, and there was one at the Deep River Inn. So
okay.
it was just huge music going on. And when
Hmm.
I woke up the next day when we got back to East Greenwich, I was sure I could hear fife and drum music playing. We lived on a little bay, and on the other side, a cove, small inlet, and on the
Right.
other side is a place called Goddard Park, a big, very large park. And I was convinced there was fife and drum happening over in Goddard Park. My father said, "No, the music's just ringing in your ears." I said, "No, Dad, I know they're playing." So he got in the car and drove me all around Goddard Park to prove to me there was not fife and drum music. It was just still ringing in my head.
I've had that happen to me before in a different context. I was in Switzerland actually, in Sion, and
Mm,
we had been
nice.
up all night singing and playing music. And the next day, we stayed up all night and didn't sleep at
Hmm.
all. And the next day, we were driving up to Zurich to go to the Haus der Kunst
Hmm.
for that. And my friend and I both were hearing the music from the night before.
Yeah.
We were having auditory hallucination.
Yes, yeah.
When you're really into music, it'll happen.
It
Uh,
will indeed. But that's just the
it's like addiction.
impression this made on my 9 or 10 year old mind at that time. Just the color, the pageantry, the flags, the muskets, just the sound, and then everybody getting together at the end and playing. I was, my God, this is the greatest thing. And why do people make fun of me for doing this? If it ever came to this, you'd never make fun of it again, you know?
Of course, if you're in Connecticut, up the road from you, I guess that is up the road from East
Next
Greenwich.
state over. Yep.
Yeah, that's such a culture of fife and drum up there. It's quite different down in Williamsburg, Virginia, where I got my training. And John Moon, when he got to be our music master, he went to one of the deep rivers, I think, with the Corps,
Mhm.
and then he saw what went on, and you know what goes on. And
Oh,
he was like,
I was in the middle of most of it.
"This is not for
This is not for our
children,"
kids.
you know.
Yeah.
So he didn't let us go to deep
Hmm.
river all through my tenure, which was 1974 to 1981.
Oh, well.
I graduated, and I just missed the march to Yorktown. That was
Ah,
the longest march ever. We went from Williamsburg to Yorktown for the
jeez.
centennial of the battle. And actually, just to throw a little bit of me in there too, um, my fourth great grandfather was a Charles City County militiaman in Virginia and was at the Battle of Yorktown under Matt Anthony Wayne. Thomas Nelson was ill, apparently, who would have been his commander. but they were shelling Thomas Nelson's house. So
No, that's
a little
rather
ill.
rude.
And there's, I think, still a cannonball in the wall down there.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, so Battle of Yorktown. I'm sorry I didn't get to go to that, but it was sort of full circle for me and my family. My father was a historian in the foundation, and you were mentioning the Kentish Guards and their history. Our unit was the State Garrison Regiment, which had been researched by Bill White. Do you know Bill?
Yes, very well.
Uh, Figured. And he was working on his master's thesis at William and Mary at the time and researching the State Garrison Regiment. My father, being a historian, had helped him with his research. So I was on the waiting list like for a week versus
Mm,
as long as it could be.
could be, yeah.
Then it was months, and later it turned into people signing up their kids as babies to get into the Corps
Wow.
because it's such an
Wow.
institution down there.
Hmm.
Billy White, who you probably also know, right?
Yep, from the old guard, or
Bard,
from
yeah,
the old guard.
drum
Yep.
major, and now with Washington Tattoo. He spoke at one of our reunions and said something I thought was really telling about the difference between New England fife and drum and the old guard in Colonial Williamsburg, pointing out that our corps, the old guard, of course, was also moved along by George Carroll, who also was our adult leader before John Moon and used to take the corps to Deep River. And he said these corps basically have a different function. They're to bring people from the outside into a certain historical mindset through the martial music. And that was the essential difference. He had a really nice speech about that. I'll have to dig it out. I had him send it to me so that I could post it on our Fife and Drum Corps fans group, of which you've been a member now for 13 years since the beginning, apparently.
Well, I tend to jump into those things pretty quickly when I see them.
I appreciate that. And we've got over 3,000 in there now, as it
Phenomenal.
turns out. I
Phenomenal.
just love
Wonderful.
networking. I founded that because I came out of Deep River 2011, which was my first time there, wearing this T-shirt for the Colonial Williamsburg
Nice.
50th
Love
anniversary.
it.
A bunch of our other guys in tie dyes and I don't know what all, but we were pretty much not a very. We look more like an F troop, right?
Yeah.
And but the event was so stirring to me. I got to know the different generations there in ways I didn't in Williamsburg when we get together because everybody goes off with their families, as I did, and didn't stay together and teach each other's histories. And
Mhm.
so 2011, I came out of that and I said, well, I really want to do something different than just be with the alumni. I want to see that our fans get an opportunity to get to know us. So that's
Mhm.
why that group exists. Now, so you did that. And then how did you come to be a flute maker and a Grammy Award winning recording artist?
Well, nominated, not winning, but
Nominated.
nominated, you know.
Oh, can't
Uh,
win them.
can't win them all. Can't win them all. Um, so I played with the Kentish Guards and eventually acquired some skills on the fife.
Mm-hmm.
And I auditioned in 1974 as like a 16-year-old or so, somewhere right around there, to go into the old guard. At one of the old guard musters, I went down there with my mother by train on Amtrak, and I passed the audition, but I was too young to go in the Army. They wanted me to sign up then. Sergeant Castle wanted me to sign on the line, but I said, no, I'll wait a little bit. And I was playing a lot with John Chalia and John Benoit. We had a trio going. It was just when John Chalia was starting to do his first arrangements. And we got a job to go to New York City in 1975. The Rockefeller Foundation for the Arts was doing a multi-album collection of the history of music in America. And
Wow.
so we being the rather popularly named American Fife Ensemble, were hired to come down by what Sir Kate Van Winkle Keller, the music historian. And she had found somewhere a copy of the Giles Gibbs Jr. collection. This is one of the earliest published manuscripts by a kid. He was 17 years old when he put these tunes together. It's a very interesting mix of tunes.
Hmm.
And so they wanted us to record this music. So there were like four of us with fifes went down, Danny Mullins went down playing the drum, and Randy Wilcox playing the bass drum. So we got there and they decided, no, bass drums are not historically correct, so can't use the bass drum. But we, recorded these tunes for the collection. And on the train ride, I told Randy and Danny Mullins that I was about to go into the old guard. And this is just as they were getting out. And John Benoit and all these guys were about to cycle out of the old guard. And those two guys spent that whole trip hammering on me. You're 17 years old. You don't know to go into the army now. The army's going to be there. Walt Disney World at that time was forming a fife and drum corps. And they said, look, a couple of guys, a guy from way back in the old guard, a guy named Phil Stevens, and then Danny Palmari from the old guard,
Hmm.
they were down there. So Rudy and Hugo said, look, go down to Disney World, get a gig down at Disney World, hang out, have some fun, go into the army after that. Well, I ended up never going into the army. That was the first time I had a formal job as a musician. I'd done a lot of playing for historical societies, young kid with a fife going in talking about Revolutionary War and, playing music. So I liked public performance at that time. I loved the history of the music that we play. So I went to Disney World. I worked down there. I decided being a musician is what I want to do. Just as I was leaving Florida the first time, I heard the first recording of a group called the Bothy Band. And they're kind of the Beatles of traditional Irish music, as they were all phenomenal players. They had a very different approach to the playing. They sounded like a rock band instead of some guys sitting in a pub. Because they had bouzouki, nobody had bouzouki. They had a phenomenal guitar player. They had a woman playing electric clavichord. They had the best uilleann piper in the world, Matt Malloy, the best flute player in the world, Kevin Burke, phenomenal fiddle. It was like mind blowing. I heard the first 8 measures of the first album and I said, that's for me. That's the sound I've been looking for.
Yeah.
That was the crossover moment into playing traditional Irish music at that time. I started discovering that so much of the fife and drum music we played had its background in Ireland and Scotland and England and was brought over through immigration. So then I just kind of jumped, you know, headlong into traditional Irish music. I got back up to Connecticut. I went into New Haven down onto State Street. I found an old music store. It's funny, I have the flute right up here. I went into this music store and it had one of these big glass cabinets at the front full of like metal flutes and trumpets on everything you could imagine was like hanging in this shop. And I walked up and it was a little Italian guy that was running the store. And it was kind of like the Kilroy was here thing. I mean, you saw like the guy's nose at the top of the counter and his forehead. And he
Huh.
said, what would you like? I said, I'm looking for a flute. And he stepped back and he looked down into the case, which was full of flutes. He said, what a flute, the flute that we got flutes. What do you want? And I said, no, 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 I don't want those. I want one of the old wooden ones. Do you have any of those? He said, wait a minute. And it was a long, thin building like the houses are in Philadelphia. They're not very wide, but they're very deep. And so he walked to the back, and I saw him go like this, and then he came back a couple of minutes later, and he had a wooden flute like this in his hand, and he said, "Like it is." I said, "Yeah, like it that, yeah." And I said, "I want that." I said, "How much do you want?" And he looked at it for a minute, and he kind of turned it around, and he said, "I want a stick of wood that big." Because he was using the flute to hold open the window at the back of his shop.
That's all he wanted.
That's all he wanted was a stick of wood the length of the flute so he could keep his window open. So that's the first simple system flute I had ever bought.
What a great story. So, when you were playing traditional Irish music, did you form some bands then? And
I got into forming some bands. I had one in New Haven for a couple of years called Finn McCool, who's a legendary figure from Irish mythology.
okay.
And I was doing a lot of solo work and, progressing and making more of a name for myself. And then I started, playing with the big boys and girls of Irish music. One of the first people I did, one of the first real superstars of Celtic music I played with was a guy called Johnny Cunningham from Portobello, Scotland. And he was a fiddle player in a phenomenal band called Silly Wizard. And so that was my first kind of step into big time Irish music. And the hook just got set deeper and deeper. I saw no reason to stop and no way out anyway, because I can't really do much of anything else. So I started to get a name, so to speak, in Irish music, and I was playing at a festival in Massachusetts called the Eisteddfod. And at these festivals, like drum corps, there's little jam sessions that start up. So there were some musicians playing in the hallway. And I went down, I started, standing around playing some tunes. And a man came up to me and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Healy, could you take a look at an instrument for me?" I said, "Well, Mr. Healy's my father. I'm Skip." And he said, "Okay, Skip." And he handed me this Blackwood two-piece, gorgeous looking whistle. And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't play recorder." He said, "It's not a recorder. It's an Irish whistle." I said, "No, they're made out of metal and plastic." "Not this one."
Mm.
He handed it to me, and that man was Chris Abel, who is the man who began the craze of wooden whistles in Irish music. And this was a very high quality instrument. Chris worked at Brandon Brothers Flute Company in Boston, which is one of the premier orchestral flute makers in the world. Chris had the idea to build this whistle, and he asked me if I would represent his company for him and see if I could get him some orders, because he was really, I mean, this was ground level for Chris. This was his first steps. And so for some reason, I don't know why, well, of course, I said yes, and we worked out a little business deal. And I said, "And if you ever need help in your shop, take me on as an apprentice."
Ah,
Now, other than to blowing into a stick to make music, I could not rub two sticks together to do anything else. I mean, I
right.
was terrified of machines. I never in my life wanted to be an instrument maker, never had the thought for a second until I just heard myself say, "Take me on as an apprentice."
Wow.
No idea why I said it, just serendipitous. And I got Chris, 20, 30 orders in a couple of weeks. And he said, "Okay, Matt, come on up to Stowe, Massachusetts, in the Emerson Umbrella for the Arts." It was an old, basically a primary school building that had been taken over and turned into individual art studios.
Okay.
And Chris had his shop in there, and took me on as an apprentice for 2 or 3 years, and I was building his whistles while he was designing his wooden classical modern flute. And I worked there for a couple of years. That was where the first idea, he asked me, "Do you have an idea for a project?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd really like to take a swing at a fife." Because at that time, a lot of people, thanks again to John Chalia, were starting to play the McDonough fife in Connecticut. And if you were going to play with John Chalia, you had to play the McDonough fife.
Now explain the McDonough fife design for a little bit.
Well,
Take that
there's
pipe part.
before this time, fifes looked basically like this.
Right.
Old style fife, embouchure hole or blowhole, and
Mhm.
6 holes down the body. What's called a diatonic instrument, like a piano with only white keys. Exactly. There you go. That's why I broke this out. I knew you were going to have one handy.
And
And
slightly
so,
different for ours, you'll notice. This
yes, yeah, yeah.
old
Mine is countersunk a little less deep than yours is. This is for
and the
early in the
size,
70s for this one.
right? And the size of our fifes
Yep,
have that larger fifth hole.
yep, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah.
And
Don't
so
work too well with other cores.
no, it's a special instrument.
My
And
50th
so
anniversary.
no, fine. Oh yeah, there you go.
Blackwood.
Blackwood. That's the stuff.
Pewter furls on it.
Well, let me, as long as we're flashing things, let me show you this. I was actually approached by Colonial Williamsburg
Mhm.
to make a fife for them. And so this was the design that I came up with.
Oh,
Now, my
great.
fifes are of a two-piece design. The fife Chris and I came up with, it was actually his idea, the board design, because he came from the modern flute industry. We basically did a reduction of the modern flute that has a parabolic curve in the head joint that opens to a cylindrical body, as opposed to a traditional fife like this that is either cylindrical all the way through, or it has a conical design on the inside, that tapers down to the end of the fife.
Right.
Now,
I wonder if you're going to get that technical stuff.
here I'm going to get a little technical and I'm going to get very controversial.
And then we'll go
Uh,
back to the McDonough for a second. The
yeah,
design.
that's right where I'm going now.
Okay.
Uh, so there was a group in the 1950s through the 60s in New York City called the New York Regimentals
Right.
that was led by a man called John McDonough. And McDonough, now the story I got, this is the story I got from Roy Seaman, who's the man who actually designed and built the McDonough fifes.
Okay.
John McDonough walked into Roy Seaman's shop. Now, at this time, Roy Seaman was the most famous maker of orchestral piccolos in the world, the biggest guy. Yeah. So McDonough walked into his shop with an old Cluse fife, which is what they were playing at that time, built during the Civil War period. And he asked if Seaman could put a D sharp key on the bottom of this fife that he had. Seaman said, "Yeah, sure, I can, but why do you want?" Yep, there you go. Exactly that. Exactly that. So he asked to have a D sharp key put on that because that's a very difficult note to half hold, the bottom hole, which is very, very small. And Seaman said, "Well, why just stop with that?" He said, Seaman, John McDonough, to show him his skill on the fife, was playing all these trumpet fanfares and all of this really fancy stuff on a six-hole fife. And Seaman said, "I'm standing there wondering, why is this guy playing all this bugle music on a fife? But whatever, good." And so Seaman said to him, "I hear you playing all this chromatic stuff, but it's not coming out well because you're having to half hole at high speed, all this stuff. Why don't you just go for a fully chromatic instrument?" Which blew McDonough's mind. And he said, "How can we do that? I don't want something with keys." He said, "You don't need keys. This thing is so small, you can cover it with your fingers." And so Seaman, the opposite of what Chris and I did, making a reduction of the orchestral flute, Seaman took his orchestral piccolo, which was D, and blew it up to B flat. And so despite the rumors, and everybody in New York City is going to hate me about this, but it was Roy Seaman's idea to make this 10-hole chromatic instrument. Now, Seaman is making hundreds and hundreds of high-level orchestral piccolos and really didn't care about making a lot of money off the fife, but he thought it was a cool idea. And because this is a rather esoteric folk music form, he figured nobody knows my name. Let's put your name on it because everybody knows you.
Ah,
That's why it became the McDonough fife, built by Roy Seaman, and why it had 10 holes as a chromatic fife. That's how the chromatic fife came into American fife and drum music.
thank you. I didn't know that.
That not a lot of people do. There's very popular legends about this was all John McDonough poking holes in sticks and figuring. No, 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 no. That was a professional
Piccolo.
piccolo maker, Roy Seaman. And that's the story Roy Seaman told me in his shop at that time in Arizona. And he's got no reason to lie about any of it.
Right.
Not that anybody else was lying. I don't want to say other people were lying, but they took the credit they were offered.
Right. We like to make up our own legends about things and then transmit them. And it's like a game of telephone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now we have this McDonough fife. Now, the problem, not really problem, but what you get from one of these cylindrical to tapered bores
Mhm.
is the low notes, as you know, are very difficult to play and not very loud. And the high notes are very loud and typically very sharp. And so what you get then is great difficulty in playing 3 and 4 part complex harmonies.
Right.
So Chris Abel had the great idea to do a reduction of the modern flute, which turned into then the Healy fife, and it changed the landscape for groups who wanted to play tight harmonies because now you don't need 7 guys playing a harmony voice to be heard. You need one. So you could really split now very easily in your fife section between lead players, mid voice players, and bass players. And everybody's going to be heard and it's going to sound like an organ when
Right.
you. This is why the old guard switched over to my fifes, with the great assistance of Billy White. That's why they switched over, because before that time, they were never able to play fifes and horns together
I
because the
see.
fifes were so out of tune with the horns.
Right.
Along comes an instrument with an in-tune chromatic scale that you can hear the harmonies. The old guard switched over and it changed what the old guard was able to do musically. Now they can play horns and fifes together. Before it was fifes, drums, horns, drums, fife solo, drum solo, horn solo, but never the integrated group, or rarely the integrated group. And they didn't do it much because it sounded like cats in an alley, you know? So now with the fife section, having in tune instruments that they can play with the horns, suddenly, bang, everything changed. Totally integrated sound in the old guard. They're able to do very complex arrangements of things.
Yes.
The horn section is out of sight skill wise with the players they have there. So
Right.
groups like the Old Guard and Middlesex County Volunteers and these groups that did complex arrangements were right at my door instantly. I really thought I would sell about 25 fifes, to be very honest with you. I never expected to sell more than 50 fifes in my life for just small ensemble work. And I'm getting up near 3,000 now.
Wow, that's incredible. You just worked a batch, right, for the old guard and another for the Royal Retainers?
Exactly. That's why, and just so everybody knows, I backed out at the last second on Hal a couple of weeks back. I live in Switzerland, okay, and we have a dog named Jeppy.
Yeah.
And Jeppy woke up one day with a throat like this. She's a miniature border collie,
Oh,
and
lovely.
we thought, oh my God, this is not good. We brought her to the vet, and it turned out she got a piece of grass stuck way down at the bottom of her jawline and it
Oh,
became infected.
right, right, like the
And that was the swelled throat. So it took a few days for her. And that was the day I was supposed to come on with you, or the day before I was supposed to come on with you at the latest.
I was
So I
going to
had to
ask
back
about
out.
Jeppy, but I was afraid to.
No, Jeppy's good and running around. You'll probably hear her barking if anyone dares walk past the house fairly soon.
Right, they're smart dogs.
No, they're frighteningly smart. Yeah,
We
yeah,
used to have
yeah.
a Shetland sheepdog, kind of a Neander Sheltie, I called it, because he's about
Mhm.
66 pounds. They got him from Pet Go Round down in
Uh,
Denver. And the dog liked to herd, of
mhm,
course,
yes.
and would insist on herding the cats.
Mhm, yep.
Scared of herding cats. This dog would do it and use
Oh,
the
yeah,
flank to push them into a corner because he knew
exactly.
scratch through the flank, and then he'd sit on the cats.
Yep. Mhm.
Cats.
Jeppy is, I mean, these are high energy dogs. They don't like to walk, they love to run, And Jeppy, so there's my wife Karen, and we have a 10-year-old daughter named Abigail. And
Oh,
so when the three of us are together, Jeppy just lays down and the world is wonderful, the world is cool. If one of us walks away from the table, Jeppy's going to follow you and she's going to kind of try to maneuver you
push you
back.
over. Yeah.
Yeah, just kind of influence you to go back into the room together.
Yeah. Cedric would suggest, select who had to go for a walk with him when it was time
Yes.
for walks too.
Mhm.
It's always get behind them and push them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
So,
They're
I
interesting animals.
yes, they are. Um,
Great
and,
companions.
as far as the fife making went, I kind of had a built-in advantage in
Hmm.
that, for your viewers, I'm kind of well known in the American fife and drum world.
You're
So my
modest.
name, hmm?
You're modest too.
Well, I live in Switzerland. I've learned this diplomatic speak.
Denmark has that too, by the way. I would live there
Oh,
for
yes.
years myself, not
Yeah.
from the Queen.
Yeah. And so my name was kind of my brand. So people
Uh-huh.
had great faith that the instrument was going to be good. So my first clients were the Kentish Guards, my original group. My second clients were Middlesex County Volunteers,
Okay.
and the third were the Quahogs, who also play,
Okay.
yeah. And so I
Clam
I,
diggers.
I opened my doors. Yeah, exactly. So I opened my doors and I had 60 orders as soon as I bought my machine, you
Wonderful.
know. So
What
it
year was that?
was that was 92 about. I think I had the idea to do it in about 90 or 91.
Hmm.
And then because I had the prototypes that I had built with Chris Abel, which is what I had played then for years. I never thought of having a business. I mean, I'm a touring musician. I was going 300,000 miles a year for years and years and years. Never more than 2 weeks in one place ever for decades. And well, for a good 20, 25 years. I mean, I was just on the road. So if it didn't fit in my suitcase, I didn't want to have it. And a shop, a lathe, you need a pretty big suitcase for a lathe. And I decided, well, this road has an end at some point. I should find something. I have all this knowledge. I have all these ideas of what I wanted to do. And so I started the Healy Flute Company. At that first, it was the Healy Fife Company. I started in Providence, Rhode Island, and because I was going to focus on making fifes. And then I decided, well, hell, these flutes can get a little better too. So then I started messing around with flute design, and I was equally well known in the traditional Irish music field as I was in the American fife and drum. So again, I have a built-in brand, and I'm playing it in concert, so people hear me playing the instrument. So I'm advertising it by myself, and 500 flutes later, here we are.
Well, that is great. And the old guard 10-hole fifes just blow my mind. I'm trying to get the. I have never actually tried to play one yet, but I'm kind of curious about.
Mhm.
And I think it was. Do you know? Trying to remember the names now. I can think of the two brothers, John and Will, and their last names are escaping me.
Yep. Yep.
You know Will.
Oh my God, why can't I
John
think?
was showing me how
Yeah.
much pain he went through learning to play your 10-hole
Yeah, you
pipes.
get what I'm told has been called Healy hand,
Huh.
because on the old McDonough fifes, on the fifth hole, they had a split hole.
Mhm.
These fingers down, only the bottom hole open for your viewers. That's the note E.
Right.
This finger up is the note F sharp. Now there's a note in between those two, which is F. So you would half hole, as we call it, to go from D, E, F, F sharp, G. And on the McDonough fifes, that was a split hole. And I never liked that because the F was really, really weak. So John Chalia had the idea to put a hole activated by your thumb on the bottom of the fife. So you could finger an E, then drop your thumb. There's a perfect F, because
Yes.
each note has its own location on the body where that note lives. You just have to poke a hole that's the correct size in relation to all the other holes, and you have whatever this tone is you're looking for. So with learning to play, the thing with the 10-hole fife is all of your fingers now have positions.
They all have jobs, right?
They all have jobs. So you can't hold it the way you can hold a 6-hole fife.
Right.
So you get a little cramp here in your thumb, or some people, not everybody, but some people do, usually from pushing too hard instead of resting your finger. on the hole, but the hole's at the bottom of the fife, so you have to push up some. So for the first couple of weeks, you often get a cramp in this hand or from the B flat hole on the that you do with your left thumb. Some people get a little cramp in there. So that became known, I'm told, as Healy hand when
I
you
see.
when you started playing my fife.
I'll bet I've probably will try to get a hold of one of these days because I
Oh,
do want to
I
collect
think
some.
we can arrange something, brother. I don't think you have to worry much.
That'd be great. And the flutes too are amazing. My friend Russ Cole plays Irish flute quite a bit out in
Yeah.
Colorado. You know Russ? Know him?
I by name we've never met, but I don't think we've met at least. But I've met a lot of people, and I was usually halfway there when I was meeting most of them.
Little story about us. In the Fife and Drum Corps in Colonial Williamsburg, we were raised almost like in a Lord of the Flies kind of
Oh
situation,
yeah.
where the older boys taught the younger ones. And
Hmm.
the older boys were a bunch of hoodlums in many cases, it seems, and
Funny
they
how
were
that
usually just
happens.
ahead of me. And my generation too, I'll be honest. But Russ rose to be our sergeant major at a very
Hmm.
young age. He must have been about 14, maybe, and held that position until 1978 when Lance Pettigo took over. And you
Hmm.
may know Lance, he's a drummer, but we don't hold that against him.
No, that's okay.
But Russ was a fifer, and he had the flu on a day when the other boys got the idea that it'd be fun to get the bikes that were rented out in the part of our building for guests at the lodge and play dodge 'em with the cars coming through the Colonial Williamsburg tunnel. Um,
Oy.
and John Moon demoted everyone involved to
Mhm.
busted them down to recruit and
Oh
then
my God.
pass the ranks back up, which they were busily
Wow.
doing. And Russ was passing his tunes for sergeant major. Bill White allowed Scott Moran, who was my five recruit instructor, to sit and play tunes while Russ was trying to pass his tunes in the
Mhm.
corner of the same room. But Scott was unable to deflect um, Russ from his climb in the ranks. And yeah, so he was a sergeant major for a very long time. It was a lot of responsibility to have
Mhm.
for a young man. And I think that really helped a lot of us. There's a very good little DVD you may have seen at Drummer's Call DVD,
Oh yeah. Yep.
in which a lot of that's discussed. And I think Bill White says, I have a nickel that just about anybody who wore the uniform will tell you that it was one of the most important things in their lives to shape them as characters. And another one, John Moon is reflecting and saying to the camera, my staff and I created 500 good citizens, people who know that they're abide by the rules and know that they're there for everybody's benefit or something to that effect. I've got clips of that I tend to put out there fairly frequently to keep. I like to say I like to try to keep the dead alive.
There you go. I love it.
My
I love
father was a historian of the inarticulate, as he said,
it.
tradesmen, merchants, and was special
Mhm.
assistant to historic trades before he took an early retirement, and then was consulting editor of the Colonial Williamsburg Journal for a while.
Nice.
He was very generous, and he liked to help people's careers along. The fact that he helped Bill White's career along helped me to get into the Corps in the first place and gave me that wonderful opportunity to be a part of that organization and the fife and drum culture. Now, we were screened from New England culture, which I think is kind of but we're making up for lost time. Um, my generation, Sergeant Major, 1981, Lance Pettigo, has a unit called the Williamsburg Field Music. Have you ever heard of
Mhm.
them?
It sounds familiar. Yeah.
And they're just like old guys who still have uniforms and can get out there and do things that the Fife and
Mhm.
Drum Corps can't. They're
Nice.
stretched too thin. You can
Yeah.
get some old guys in uniform and you don't really notice their age too much. For one thing, Lance doesn't seem to have aged anyway, even though he's my age. Um, and we went up to Deep River actually together. That was the last time I played in uniform in 2019. We were
Oh,
there and we were the youngest corps on the field. We got a little
nice.
trophy for that. They be good to you when you come up there,
Oh yeah.
celebrate fifing and drumming. You probably do a lot in Switzerland too, with fife and drum, right? Or Do you
There's
recall much?
at one point, some years ago, I was literally teaching every American style fife and drum corps in Switzerland.
And
Uh,
who are they?
at this time in the 90s. So the first group over here was the Swiss Mariners, who
Okay.
are a brother organization to the Ancient Mariners that I played with for 40, 50 years at this point.
Wow.
Um, then it's funny. You mentioned Carroll years ago about
Yes.
starting the Colonial Williamsburg. He also started the Fife and Drum Corps at Disney World.
Right.
Also started the Old Guard.
Right.
So he was the kind of Johnny Appleseed, so to speak, in, if we want to say, Southern American style fife and drum. Over here, there was a man called Otto Wick. He was a Basel style drummer, very famous Basel style drummer of the older school of Basel drumming.
Okay.
So a man called Freddie Bruder was the original organizer of the Swiss Mariners, and
Hmm.
Adi Wick was one of the drummers in the group. Freddie was a very famous Swiss-style drummer. He played in a drum quartet called the Ratabangs that came over to the United States at the Deep River 1976. And they were exhibition-style drums with black lights and all just
Wow.
unbelievable stuff. They did all stick fencing and throwing sticks at each other. And the thing about them, they didn't carry extra sticks with them. Like a lot, like Top Secret and some of these other groups, they have like a sheath of extra sticks on their drums. So if they drop one, they pick up another really, really quick. And I
Right.
mentioned to Freddie one time, I said, wow, I see you guys don't carry extra sticks. He said, we don't drop ours. And so Freddie began the Ancient Mariners. There was a disagreement between Adi Wick and Freddie Bruder.
Mhm.
Adi left the group and formed the Swiss Regimentals, which
Hmm.
played in the style of the old Connecticut Yanks. There was a disagreement with Adi and some members in the drum section about how to play American drumming. Adi left the group again and started a group called the Wild Bunch.
I've heard them.
Yes, and I was the original teacher of the Wild Bunch and kind of helped
Hmm.
shape their sound because
Interesting.
unfortunate, in my opinion, and this will be an unpopular opinion here, but I don't especially care. Um,
Good.
one thing that happened by the Swiss Mariners being aligned with the ancient Mariners in music and uniform, that
Mhm.
kind of established a precedent here that you needed to be hooked up with an American fife and drum corps, and you needed to wear their uniforms and you needed to play their music.
Hmm. Fascinating.
Roy Watras's idea, the man who formed the Ancient Mariners originally about Swiss fife and drum corps, is we should send them music. We should help them. We should teach them how to play the instruments, but they should find their own sound. They shouldn't copy something that's existing. Come up with your own thing, like Roy did with the Ancient Mariners. When Adi went to the Wild Bunch, he's like, okay, Ancient Mariners, Connecticut Yanks, let's do something original.
Mhm.
And so the Wild Bunch patterned themselves after the Western movie, The Wild Bunch. So they all dress independently in, cowboy garb, late 1800 look. They have I told them, look, let's have a wild sound. Let's not play with other people. Let's do our own thing and, make your own sound as a group and have your own identity. So at
Mhm.
that point, I was playing with the Ancient Mariners. I was teaching the Swiss Regimentals. I was teaching the Wild Bunch. There was a group down in Lugano, which is right on the border with Italy, called Menden Bannock, that was formed by an American drummer called Mike Quinn, who actually was the percussionist at La Scala at that time, but he grew up in American fife and drum music. He wanted his kids to learn fife and drum music, so he was teaching his two children to play the fife because he was a drummer. Drummers need fifers. They don't, but you can't have fife and drum if you don't, mix in a fife here and there. and another man named Hugo Bach, also from Lugano, played bass drum. So it was a very small group, and they organized the first American style musters over here in Lugano. So that's when American
Wow.
groups coming over to American style fife and drum corps. So I was teaching those four groups, and in the town next to where I live here, I live in a very small town called Volen.
Yeah.
Over the hill from us is another small, this is farm country, basically, where I am here.
Mhm.
Another group started that was called the Swiss Colonials. And I ended up teaching them. So I was playing with and teaching all fife and drum groups in Switzerland in the early 1990s for a few years. And what's interesting is my wife's mother and father were members of the Swiss Colonials. And that's how I met my future wife's family. Now, my wife, I have to say, is 21 years younger than me. And she was about 9 or 10 years old when I first met her. But I met her through the connection that I had with her parents. And, eventually I saw her again for her 30th birthday party, and the rest is history.
Wow. Well, look at you. That's a great pattern. The Wild Bunch, a friend of mine who played with them. I don't know if you knew him. I thought I'd feel it out. Paul Vostein. Did you know
Oh,
Paul?
yep.
Oh
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, I remember the name. Yep.
Yeah, he's over here in Western Virginia. I think I don't know if it's West Virginia or whether
Oh,
he's on the border there. He's got a farm now, but he was over there, I think, during our 50th anniversary. He traveled
mhm.
all the way to Williamsburg to be there for the 50th, and we caught up a little bit then. And we've been pretty good friends since then. And he was one of the adult instructors of the Corps for a bit as well, back in the day when I was working in the foundry in Williamsburg. Speaking of apprenticeships, I did about 3 years of an apprenticeship in the foundry before moving to the gunsmith shop briefly, and then getting just on a whim, I applied to be a conservation technician. And so I
Oh,
went behind the scenes and did conservation in Colonial Williamsburg. And then after I did my MA in German at Pitt, I was at Carnegie Mellon University and
mm.
did conservation work there. But we didn't do any work on fifes, actually. We didn't seem to have any collections. But let's get back to fife and drum for a minute. And so you moved to Switzerland properly in 2015. Is that right? Is that what I picked
Well,
up?
I came over here the first time in 1982
Okay.
to play with the Ancient and Swiss Mariners at a now legendary concert in a Roman amphitheater
Oh,
in a place called Kaiser Augst. And there were about 2,000 or 2,500 spectators
okay.
at this concert. I played a flute solo at one point in the concert and had about a 5 minute standing ovation after that. Just for your viewers, Basel, Switzerland
Yes.
has an ancient history of fife and drum music. The first recorded use of fifes and drums on the battlefield was in 1410, um, or thereabouts. Switzerland, Basel has a carnival called Fasnacht.
Yeah.
It's one of these basically druid kind of carnivals, making a bunch of noise and chasing winter away so that spring can come in. Now, in Basel, there's something like 15 or 20,000 Basel piccolo players and 30 or 40 or more thousand drummers. And so this carnival goes for 3 days, basically nonstop, completely in these unbelievable costumes. Each
Right.
group, which they call clique, has a sujet or a subject, which is what they portray for that year's Fastnacht. And so it was ripe for American style fife and drum. The
I see.
Fastnacht music is a little slower, a little bouncier. Dum bum bum be da 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 dum ba da da bum be da da dum. So they play at this very kind of bouncy going down the street, and the ancient mariner music is so it's kind of a mind-blowing thing for your average Basel Fastnachter. So
Hmm.
I instantly, after that concert, had all of the students I wanted, all of the opportunities to play concerts, house parties, things like that. I came over for 2 weeks. I stayed for 3 months. And I had something to do every day in those 3 months. And I thought, this Switzerland ain't so bad.
No,
So I just started informally coming back. In those days, you could stay for 3 months in a European country. Then you had to leave for 30 days and you could come back for another 3 months.
I see.
So this is when, while I was a touring musician, so I would come to Switzerland, stay my time here, play in France, play in Germany, be based out of Switzerland. Then I would go to Ireland for 3 months, study traditional Irish music, play in sessions, travel around. There was an old man that eventually I met that I learned, Phil Malachny, who I learned hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tunes from. And then I would fly to Boston. Now, what happened? So I did that for quite a while. Then I started getting increasingly invasive questioning from customs in Boston. And this is in the Reagan area. This is long before
Yeah,
ICE or TSA or any of these organizations.
sure.
And my brother was a federal marshal
Hmm.
for 30 years. In fact, he retired as agent in charge of New England. Very, very, very high position in the federal marshal program. He was the guy that was working the investigations out of Logan Airport after 9/11. And so he was, up to his eyeballs in a lot of things. So I called him up one day and I said, "Yo, Tommy." He said, "Yeah, what's up?" I said, "I got to ask you about something." "What?" I said, "I'm really starting to get shakedowns when I come back into the States, and I'm wondering why." And he said, "Well, what have you been up to?" I said, "Well, my usual thing, just traveling and playing music." He said, "Yeah, where are you traveling to exactly?" I said, "Well, I'm flying out of Boston mainly, and I'm flying to Zurich. And then I'm flying from Zurich to Dublin, and then back to Boston." And he just starts laughing. I said, "Okay, what am I missing?" He says, "Why don't you tattoo courier across your forehead? It might make it a little easier." Because what they were doing, they didn't care about my instruments. They didn't shake down my bag very much. Now, this is before cell phones and take your
Hmm.
computer with you. When we used to carry actual address books with us.
Yeah.
And they would go page by page through my address book. What's this phone number? What's this mean here on the side? So then it made sense to me that they thought, because he says, "Look, you're traveling from one of the highest fundraising areas for the IRA to Switzerland, where all the money goes, to Dublin, back to Boston, back to Switzerland, back to Ireland. So they're
Triangle
just
trade.
triangle." He said, "And anyone who travels in a triangle, an established triangle like that, the computer spits it out. That's a suspicious travel pattern." So that's what they're doing. They're just pushing up the pressure because it was strip searches at this point.
Wow.
Oh yeah, I mean, standing naked against the wall and seven guys yelling questions at you and keeping you there till coffee time and then would let you go. In fact, towards the end, I would get off the plane, I would come into the baggage area, and there'd be a guy standing there just looking around, and he would just walk up to me and say, "Mr. Healy, collect your bag and come with me, please." Didn't even ask for the passport, knew my name. I mean, they had me by photo recognition. They knew I was on the plane and they would wait for me to hit the lobby. They'd go through my bags. I get brought in the back and strip searched. And I asked my brother, I said, is is it going to go any more than this? He said, "Well, if they start reaching for a glove, they think they got you for something."
I see.
But they never reached for the glove. So they
Hmm.
just upped the pressure until they were satisfied that I really was just a dumb musician traveling around, and that was the end of the travel problems.
Well, you were doing a lot of recording as well, right? So you want to talk a little bit about your recordings? I'd like to hear about them.
Thank you. The first recording I ever did was the one I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
uh, for the Rockefeller Foundation with the American Fife Ensemble.
Right, right.
And I really liked it. I mean, I like being in a recording studio. I have zero nerves in a recording studio. I like that environment. So I started thinking, well, let me put out my own album and see what happens. So the first recording I did under my name was called Marathon Dreams. I was living in New Haven, Connecticut, and I was driving a marathon checker during the day, the old big old taxi cabs.
Yeah.
And that's how I made the money to finance the first recording. And hence the name of the recording, Marathon Dreams, because as I'm, driving around smoking what I was smoking, thinking about things, that's how I put the album together, and how I, thought of the musicians. That went okay. Then I thought, okay, let's do something really formal. And at that time, this is early 1980s, if you played traditional Irish music, you played traditional Irish music. If you played traditional Scottish music, you played traditional Scottish music. If you played American fife and drum, you played American fife and drum. And never the twain shall meet. I mean, it was very uh, centric about the tradition you came from. Now, I was a fan of the band Jethro Tull. And what I really liked about Jethro Tull, unlike the other English bands at that time, or Great Britain-based band, Rolling Stones, for example, they leaned really heavily into American blues. Jethro Tull did not as a band. There's always this undercurrent of English folk revival under what they did. There's really folk music sound to it.
Yep.
And that got me thinking, wow, why the hell can if Ian Anderson can do this in quote unquote progressive rock, why the hell can't I do that in folk music? Because I grew up playing all of these traditions. I know great players in all these traditions. Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead. So I called some friends of mine from Canada who specialized in Scottish music, and they had a band called Rare Air, where they had a jazz guitarist named Dick Murray. Trevor Ferrier was the percussionist from the band. He was a three-time world champion Scottish high tension drummer. And earlier they had three, but at this time they had two Highland bagpipe players. Now, the bagpipe players and Trevor played in a group called the 79th Fraser Highlanders in Toronto. And that was the first non-Scottish Class A band to win a world championship. So these are real high-level guys. So I brought those guys down. I had a friend, Jerry O'Sullivan, who's one of the greatest uilleann pipers in the world from traditional Irish music. I
Mhm.
wanted to incorporate American fife and drum music into that. So I played a lot of American fife on that. The album was called Empty Pockets, which is
Right.
why everything I do is called Empty Pockets
I love that.
in one way or another. So
Now,
I brought
the empty
these.
pockets I know. Let me just make sure I nail this one down. Is that in Emmett and
Yes, that's from Bruce and Emmett.
Bruce and Emmett?
That's
Right.
from the Bruce and Emmett book,
Yeah.
Bruce and Emmett Guide uh, of Fife and Drum. This
Which is
this was
really a
kind of
Civil
the
War period, right?
exactly. This was kind of the not kind of, it was the tutor for musicians coming into the Grand Army of the Potomac, the Union Army, for learning to play fife and drum.
And was that the first time Empty Pockets was set down in Bruce and Emmett, or was there earlier
There,
versions?
there are
Sure.
arguably earlier versions of the tune, but as time progresses and as society progresses, things speed up. Okay, in colonial American music, as you well know, it's a lot of quarter note, it's a lot of eighth note. Later in the 18th century, we start seeing a few more 16th notes. Now we're starting to get into transatlantic railway. We're getting into society is faster. More people are living together. This is reflected in the fife traditions at the time. Lots more 16th notes, lots more very angular jumps in the tunes, not so much waves. Our fife music is tongue articulated as opposed to Irish flute music, which is more finger and throat articulated. So as this music is progressing, as society is progressing and the music is getting, every life is getting more complicated, the music starts to get more complicated. So earlier versions of this tune, Empty Pockets, that I've seen don't have the syncopation. Didn't have any of that. It was much more da-dum, ba-dee-da-dee-dum. So it's kind of sort of the frame of Empty Pockets. If you want to try to find it, you'll find it. If you're not looking for it, you won't notice it. But Empty Pockets, as we know it in drum corps, I'm pretty sure Bruce and Emmett was the first time that was published as a tune with a formal drum beat.
We used to call those the illegal tunes in Colonial Williamsburg because not Revolutionary War.
Yeah, exactly.
We used to have to pass them for rank at corporal and sergeant, I believe, to because they were challenging pieces and
Hmm.
they would test your skills in ways that a lot of our official tunes did not so much.
Yeah.
So an awful lot of our repertoire was Scots and Irish. After all, John Moon had been
Hmm.
the youngest drum major in the Scots Guards
Hmm.
before he retired from the British Army and came to us. So
And
empty pockets
remembering
are
the primary function of that music was
mhm.
to get large masses of men to move from one area to the next. So
Yep.
you're not going to want to be, as a musician, you're not going to want to be playing tunes that are solid 16th notes all the way through. You know, it's much more long note. The marches are very open, nice cadences, basically to walk to. I mean, the idea was to
The
keep your
16th
mind
Street.
off of the bloody battle you're about to go into, you
Yeah.
know? And then, of course, when black powder, as you know, when black powder was introduced to the battlefield, after the first volley, nobody can see anything. So where earlier they would use flags as signaling devices, go left, go right, come back, do this, do that, it started to turn into then musical instruments,
Right. Cutting
unmuffled
it through.
drums, because you hear that, you hear these signals. There were, as you know, what were called the camp duties. Every bit of your daily life in camp, you got a signal from fifers, drummers, or both. Get up, go eat. Here's
Yeah.
sick call. Here's form in. So music was integrated to such a degree in early life in the military. It was the primary signaling device. It was the primary leisure activity. You know, there was always somebody blowing on a fife and somebody banging on a drum. I mean, those were just the
Yeah.
sounds of the army.
Well, that was my summers. We would have a pair of us, was the duty fifer and drummer at the Powder Magazine, and we'd be
Hmm.
doing Pioneers March, we'd be doing Roast Beef,
Yeah, there you go.
all these tunes that would signal what time of day it was. We're like the
Right.
clock. After all, not
Yeah.
everybody has a nice watch on their wrist.
Yeah,
Um,
this is true. This is true.
so
That's
yeah,
how our American fife and drum corps system started after the Civil War, because there were so many fifers, so many drummers during the American Civil Wars. Military groups always have Veterans Days. They have, the groups reunite. They get together for anniversary. And these old fifers and drummers would get together. They all knew the same tunes
right,
because they all learned the same tunes. And then they started marching together more as massed bands. And
right,
this is where our concept of fife and drum corps began.
yep.
So there
And it's
were
alumni.
fifers and drummers used, but they were usually there was one fifer and one drummer or one bugler per 100 men.
Our alumni have a little bit of difficulty. That was because of our generations. So in the 50th anniversary, for which T-shirt I'm wearing,
Mhm.
we broke up into three corps. There was the
Ah, nice.
George Carroll Corps,
Hmm.
it was the John Moon Corps, which I marched with. Then there was the Tim Sutphin Corps. Then we had
Hmm.
the Senior Corps and the Junior Corps of the current corps marching. So we had five corps
Wow.
field. each one of did its stand piece, marched around Market Square. And then it was really kind of weird. I don't know if you know the name Dylan Pritchett. Goes
No.
by Aesop now. He's a storyteller. And he was one of our African American fifers in the Corps. We didn't have a lot, but we had a few. But exceptional musician, and he was an adult leader of the Corps as well. When I was in, he was initially, you know, one of the people busted to recruit. He was passing back up when I was a recruit, but he went back up to his rank
Mhm.
very rapidly. And he grabbed a mace at the end of that show on the Market Square, and it was not part of the program until afterwards. And all the corps fell in together in this mass corps, and then we
Nice.
took off of Market Square, back down the Duke of Gloucester Street to the Capitol. If you've been to Williamsburg, you know the scene.
Yeah.
And then we wheeled around, did a counter march at the Capitol, and marched back to the building, breaking into columns of twos to wheeled our way through. That building we have in Williamsburg was purpose built for fifing and drumming
Really? Wow.
in 1980.
Nice.
It
Nice.
had been in the. I'm going to deviate a little, tell this a little bit of this story, but I want to get back to Switzerland soon. Um, the point being that we were in this old building
Hmm.
from before I got in the Corps, I guess during George Carroll's tenure, and we shared it with the Shroff James Pipe and Drum, the bagpipers who were volunteers. I don't think they were part of Colonial Williamsburg, but that old building was a courthouse built about 1930 something when the courthouse of 1770 was turned over to Colonial Williamsburg. It had been the actual courthouse of Williamsburg
Hmm.
up until the 1930s when Rockefeller, had bought the whole dang town.
Yeah. Well,
Restored it to its 18th century appearance. So the
those
Rockefeller was
pre-tax
really
dollars,
influential for us with your first recording and my whole life. But this old courthouse building had asbestos tiles
Ooh.
in the courtroom, which was our main room where we did drums and guns, for instance. We didn't use the fife part because that's an illegal tune.
Right.
We did use the drum open beating because it's just great,
Yeah.
but it would shake those tiles so badly that they were falling
Oof.
to the drum line. And the president of the foundation at the time, Chuck Longsworth, was there discussing the possibility of needing a new facility for Colonial Williamsburg Fife and Drum when a huge section of the tiles just fell and just missed him and John Moon, which sort of clinched the deal. And my generation was the first one to graduate from what my father called Moon's bunker, this half buried, sort of insulated kind of building, and had soundproof practice rooms. But it lacked that character that the old courthouse building did.
Mhm.
Our senior corps locker room was furnished with things like bench seats ripped out of cars. And I actually programmed the senior corps locker room. I bought a little Radio Shack 8-track player, and what was on it?
Mhm.
Jethro Tull songs from the Wood, a lot,
My favorite
jazz,
album.
a lot of Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
So I was making sure that people were hearing what I thought they ought to hear. And,
Mhm.
you know, tuning our ears to the music was important. And a lot of them, became pretty good musicians afterwards. In fact, I don't know if you've heard Poison Dwarf before. Does that
No.
ring a bell? Look them up. My friends in Williamsburg who are still there is the percussionist is Lance Pedigo, who was the adult leader of the Corps for about 25 years. And he's got Tom DeRose on the flutes and Stuart Pittman on the Ualian pipes, and you've
Oh.
got a violin player, a guitarist. They do some nice stuff. And there's some legend that goes with this Poison Dwarf thing, but it's a secret I'm not privy to.
Okay.
Bands get their names. Another thing I was going to mention. Oh, well, I'm going to have to look up your recordings and I'm going to try to get them played by a friend of mine who has a radio show on Friday and Monday mornings out in
Oh, great. Thank you.
kskq.org is the radio station. I
Thank you.
stumbled onto that through being a fan of David Gantz, who has a radio
Mhm.
show on Sirius XM radio. And you may notice in the background, I have a predilection for Grateful Dead stuff. He has the Golden Road show and the Grateful Dead Hour on Sirius XM radio. He was being interviewed by the young lady who hosts the morning show And we got to be friends because she started talking about somebody leaving a note on her car on the somewhere in Maryland years earlier. Now she's in Oregon. They said, "Hey, I like the stickers on your car. You want to trade some tapes?" And just the
Nice.
whole culture
Oh yeah.
that
Yeah.
spins together, and they all work together in a lot of ways. I think the traditional music that the Grateful Dead used, comes out of the older traditions, and they feed into each other. I've been kind of fascinated. I haven't dug into it deeply yet, but I'm really interested in the fife and drum blues that you find down in the South.
Hmm.
You heard them.
Yep.
North Mississippi All Stars used fife and drum blues, and
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of it. He had such a phenomenal name. This guy, like that movie Gangs of New York.
yeah,
In the very beginning of that, that's exactly that kind of music is the track as
it
they're
really.
walking through this one giant building, and there's this really eerie, weird flute music. That is this man. Oh, I wish I could remember his name.
Well,
Uh,
maybe it'll come back.
yeah, you know,
I was going to ask, though, I wanted to back up to this military aspect of fifing and
certainly.
drum, communications on the battlefield and such. And in
Mhm.
Switzerland, is that how fifing and drumming got started there too? Was it military?
Pretty much.
Communication
Switzerland,
through distance?
exactly. Switzerland has not been in a fighting war for over 800 years right now. But before that time, they were the most feared mercenaries in Europe
Sure. They
because
guard.
you hired these Swiss Guard guys. You have a problem. They came into town. They killed every man, every woman, every kid, every animal. There was nothing alive when they left.
Wow.
Oh, yeah, pretty severe, So people eventually learned, maybe we don't want to mess with these guys, you know. But before that, they would, as I've been told over here, when they were approaching these towns, that's how they were approaching with this music, basically as a warning, we're coming. Here we come, leave or die, your choice, because that's what's going to happen.
I like that.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty
Now,
pretty hairy stuff, man.
I actually was part of a fife and drum unit, one time only kind of thing, just recently here in Washington, D.C. We have, Pride Month, JP
Hmm.
Pride Month, and we had the Pride of America fife and drum for the
Oh,
first.
I love it. Hmm.
It was great. We had a blast. I was playing a peeler then. This I got it
Oh
in
yeah, great. Oh,
2011.
I know, Ron. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
I've got
he
quite a few of these acrylic fifes,
yeah
and I like
he.
this one because it's kind of like a tie dye. There's a
It's
lot
great.
of stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know if I'm going to make you jealous or make you hate me
No,
or
sure not.
Um, one time when I was in San Francisco, I was down by Pier 39, and I was enjoying a certain combustible material at that time, and this voice comes up behind me. Hey, brother, that smells great, man. And I turn around, and it was Jerry Garcia. And so he sits down next to me, and he and I enjoyed a few combustibles together, and we talked about music, talked about American folk music, of which he was very, very knowledgeable. He was a great banjo player. Did you ever hear of Old and in the Way?
Sure. I don't
Okay.
own it, but I have heard of it, and I think it may
Yeah.
be on my Sonos.
Okay. Some great, great recordings. They have a couple of CDs that they made that you should be able
Hmm,
to find.
sure.
A great version of Wild Horses that they recorded. Man, it ain't the Stones version of it, let me tell you. El Garcia
Now,
was a phenomenal banjo player. And, as somebody who's only played folk music my whole life, I was really impressed with
so
how
what?
much he knew about it.
Oh, interesting. So more about what you talked about. Do you remember much about the conversation?
Um, we sat down, we started having a smoke together, and he said, "What's your name, brother?" And I said, "My name's Skip." And he said, "Skip, it's nice to meet you." I said, "Bro, I think I know who you are." "Yeah, I'm Jerry." Just totally chill. And I said, "Well, Jerry, I know you're famous for one thing, but brother, I got to tell you, I love your banjo playing.
Yeah,
He said,
I bet he liked
really?
that, huh?
Oh, he loved that. He did not want to talk about the dead. He
No.
really didn't, you know? And we just got, you know, ass deep into American folk music. And he starts talking about, different styles, frailing style of playing, clawhammer style of banjo playing. He said, yeah, I like the rhythm of that, but I like the tightness of picking on the banjo. I can articulate better on that because he said I can always throw some clawhammer into picking style, but it's hard to throw picking style in because one's a four-string instrument, the other's a five-string instrument.
Mhm.
And it just went down that road, about Appalachian music or Appalachian music, depending on how you prefer to pronounce it. Um, about some of these, old musicians, and it was funny. He talked about um, Folk Legacy Records. Folk Legacy Records was run by Sandy Davis, up in Sharon, Connecticut, Northwest Connecticut. And he and his wife were some of the very first people to go down with tape recorders and start recording this mountain music that they then started releasing on albums. And Jerry talked about, what an inspiration, how cool that stuff was. Wow, man, these guys, humping a recorder out in the middle of Fatback, no place, and they're recording all these old guys. And I just love that stuff. And I knew, these guys, Peyton, Sandy Davis. I said the wrong name before. The Peyton family,
Yeah.
because I played a lot with Dave Peyton and Robin Payton. Dave was a great concertina player, and Robin was a fiddle player, and they were both world-class whitewater kayakers. Also, they were on the Olympic team that was
Oh.
canceled. I think Jimmy Carter held back the American Olympic team from one of the Olympic. They were
Yeah,
on that.
because of the invasion of Afghanistan, right?
Exactly, and they missed being in the Olympics
But that
because
much.
of that. Yeah, by much. So yeah,
Dang.
Garcia was, I mean, so deep in the knowledge and talking about then bluegrass music and then newgrass music, as it's called, progressive bluegrass, if you will, and just talking about he said, look, he said, the one thing I tried to bring into the Dead a little bit is more the vocal style of singing of this Appalachian music, which is, halfway yodeling and halfway singing and the harmonies that they built and the way they carried those chords through. So he says, to me, when we sing, we're singing Appalachian style. We're not singing rock style. That's what I tried to blend in from, the stuff that I really like over on that side. And then he sat there for a second. And, I don't think I ever told anybody that before. So I might be the only person he ever said that to,
Well,
you
I'm glad
know?
I threw it out too.
Oh man,
Let it have it.
yeah. So, and that's kind of my life. I end up standing one place, and Abel walks up to me and says, "Hey, how about this?" I'm sitting on a bench smoking a joint. Jerry Garcia says, "Hey, bro, that smells good. You got any more?" And I mean, on and on and on. And I can keep you here for days with stories like that.
Maybe we'll revisit it then.
Uh,
I'll have you back.
you know how to find
There's
me,
so
bro.
much. There's so much I want to know about all of that. I mean, you were out in San Francisco. Why were you out in San Francisco again? You said you were out at Pier
Uh,
39, right?
yeah, San Francisco has some fantastic Irish clubs out there. On
Good.
Geary Street, there was a place that I used to play in, called Ireland's 32. Actually, I had mentioned this fiddle player, Johnny Cunningham, before. Johnny brought me out to San Francisco the first time that I was ever in the city. And if you haven't been to San Francisco, you should go sometime. It's fascinating with all of the, in New York, they would call it boroughs, but all the districts that are in San Francisco. So there's Mexican Quarter and there's an Irish area. where there were three phenomenal pubs within spitting distance of each other, and a fourth about a 3 minute walk away. There was Ireland's 32. There was, no, I'm going back some years, okay? There was a place called Cork in the Bottle, and there was a third place called, oh, as a matter of fact, look at this.
Timely.
There's a poster. There's yours truly right here.
Bottle. Okay, great. There you are.
Yeah, this guy here is John Caulfield. He's an Irishman from Dundalk, and he lived in New York City for a very long time. The first sessions I went to in New York were hosted by John Caulfield, and then he ended up moving out to San Francisco. So what was cool in San Francisco, if you worked in Ireland's 32, they would usually hire for a week to 10 days. If
Mm.
you worked in Ireland's 32, Cork in the Bottle would hire you right after that. And then the Plow and Stars was one, they would hire you after that. So you could easily be in San Francisco working 5 or 6 weeks back then. So this is in the 80s. Whereas in New York City, if you play in one club, no other club's going to hire you for a year.
Hmm.
Yeah, but it was completely the opposite in San Francisco. If one club knew you were coming, you get booked into all the other places as long as you were out there.
A little
San,
residency.
Fran- San Francisco is one of the five major points of immigration for Irish people. Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, San Francisco. So those cities all have, if you're a touring musician, you're hitting those places endlessly because of the large Irish populations that have been there for, 100 years or more, and so it's Chicago is also kind of welcoming like that. If you're playing in one place, you can go play in the other place. They don't mind it so much. But New York was very, very different.
Yeah. Well, that's a fantastic, you know, connection to have made, and I'm really appreciative of the story because
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Gary never told it to anybody else. He may have only left it with you to transmit out to the rest of the world. It's all about the ripple effects, in my view.
I mean, it was a pretty good weed dude. He probably that sparked his memory. He might have forgotten it until then.
Yeah, but I understand he was a great raconteur, and there's a Williamsburg
Oh yeah.
connection there too, and Bruce Hornsby playing with him.
Hmm.
Bruce, of course, was raised in Williamsburg and went to James Blair High School. And another friend of ours was in Fife and Drum with me a generation before. He was actually my nursery school teacher's son. That was our connection, but we really got to know each other at Deep River. And he
Hmm.
left Williamsburg to become a photographer up
Oh
in
wow.
New York City on Manhattan and became good friends with Suzanne Vega.
Oh, okay.
And he was backstage with Suzanne when she was opening for the Grateful Dead one time, and he mentioned that he knew Bruce Hornsby, went to school with him, played football with him, or whatever, I think. And but he went by Chip when he was
Hmm.
under George Carroll.
Okay.
In fact, there's a good image of him marching on the Mall in Washington D.C. as the drum major.
Oh well.
Rose, but his real name's Brian. And Suzanne went to Bruce and said, "Hey, I've got Brian Rose in my dressing room. He says he knows you," and didn't ring a bell to Bruce because he knew him as Chip. But he went into the dressing room. They started catching up on all things Williamsburg, much to the amusement of the Grateful Dead and Suzanne. So
Oh well.
I caught her at Lincoln Theater just recently, actually. She's out on tour with a new album.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's nice that they're still working. And the funny story about that was I was sitting watching Suzanne play at the Birchmere, and I was putting out there to um, maybe the Colonial Williamsburg alumni on one of Brian's posts in which he had posted a picture of him with her at a club in New York City, speaking of New York City clubs. And I mentioned that I was there, and he saw it apparently from wherever he was, probably in Manhattan. And he started telling me the story and sent me the link to an article of her being interviewed about Tom's Diner. Do you know that song by any chance?
Yep. Yeah, I heard it.
And they had been at this restaurant, Tom's Restaurant, actually, is what it's called. And but diner worked better for the rhythm. And it turned out that Brian had been talking to Suzanne about how he saw everything like through a pane of glass. That sort of feeling of alienation sometimes you have in New York City.
Mhm.
So she was thinking about that when she was in the restaurant after he had left, and she wrote Tom's Diner based on his inspiration. So nice
Mhm.
Williamsburg connection there too. I like to have it all come together. Um, but getting back to your Switzerland military music and your recordings, so we were on Empty Pockets a while.
Yes.
Started going off into
Yeah,
future.
well, that happens.
It does. You've done some others. You've done a lot of that. Was it nominated for a Grammy, correct? And
Yes,
how many
it was
nominations do you?
actually it was nominated for two Grammys. It was nominated for Best New Artist or Best First Release. I forget what it was called, and it was also nominated for the artwork,
Oh, great.
the cover.
I don't have it myself, but I will go out and get it, I think.
Okay.
What other ones have you been nominated for? And
Um,
what was the style too?
a couple of like indie awards, and I never won any of them, but I was, nominated. My not my problem, my situation is I don't like working with record companies because they just screw over everybody. In fact, the Empty Pockets album I was going to put out through I'm not going to mention any of them. I was going to go out through one record company, and they didn't back out, but they made so many demands about how they wanted me to remix the album that I just said, no, that's not what's in
Mm.
here, no. And my friend Johnny Cunningham produced the album, this fiddle player I've mentioned a couple of times,
Uh-huh.
produced and played on it. And but then I owed, a bunch of money. I had a couple of people who were supporting the album, so then I had to sign a contract with a different record company. And what happens is the musician is not notified that you've been nominated for anything. The record company is notified that you've been nominated for, a Grammy award or an Indie award or something like that. And then the record company is supposed to tell you that you've been nominated for this, and you're actually, they actually send, a paper. And this record company that put out Empty Pockets kept all that stuff. I found out after the fact that
Wow.
that it, that it had even been nominated. Because
Yeah. Heard that
last
the
thing I'm
industry
expecting is,
forgiveness. Yeah.
you know. So yeah, so there's been some of those things. For me, the important recognition is 50 years into it, people still want to hear me play. So
Yeah.
that's for me is the recognition. If some people consider me to be a top level player, and I always say
Yankee Magazine does apparently.
Yankee Magazine calls me the greatest fife player in the world. So
Yeah, there you go.
there you go. I'll take that. I guess they haven't heard many fife players. I don't know. There's an old saying in the entertainment business: it's easy to get to the top. It's hard to stay there.
Yeah.
you know. And one of the other sayings I have always taken to the heart is that be nice to everybody you meet on your way up, because it's the same people you're going to see on your way back down.
That's good. I like
Yeah,
it.
that's real good. My friend Johnny Cunningham was a big influence on me on these things also. He told me a couple of things. One thing that's always stuck with me. He says, "Yeah, when you do a show, remember, everybody sitting in front of you had someplace else to be tonight.
Oh, that's a good point.
They chose to come here. They chose to take money. They could have bought shoes for their kids. They could have took their kids out to dinner. They could have bought themselves something. They decided to spend that money to come hear you. Don't ever forget that.
Yeah.
That was some great advice. And he also, for all you fledgling musicians out there or established musicians that are listening to Hal's great programming, um, some great advice that I got from Johnny about bad shows. You come into a venue, management is nasty, they're lousy, you don't like how it's going, they're haggling with you over paying for your own drinks or trying to hold back money from you or anything. Johnny said, just remember, you're always going to come into a situation like that. He said, come in, be nice, go out on stage, be brilliant, take the money at the end, and never go back there again.
Right.
You know, don't make yourself look bad by
Right.
being an idiot. Go in, blow the place up, and just never go back. So
Yeah.
don't disappoint your audience. Make a connection with your audience. Just start off with a couple of jokes, you
Well,
know?
that's the truth. I am the audience for most of the things I love in music, and
Hmm.
moving the needle for the artist is near and dear to my heart. I've been
Hmm.
sipping my coffee here a little bit through this can
Nice.
here, and
Oh yeah, I like it.
it says Holly Bowling, The
Holly
Wilderness
Bowling.
Sessions. Have you ever heard of Holly?
Okay. No.
And a lot of people haven't, but I hadn't. And I went to a show August 1st, Jerry's birthday of 2019.
Swiss Independence Day.
It's Swiss Independence Day
That,
too. That's one
that's
week away.
Swiss Fourth of July. That's Swiss Fourth of July.
Well, we didn't know we were celebrating that. We thought we were celebrating Jerry's birthday. And Live Day 69 was playing. And have you ever heard of that combination?
Yes, I haven't
Yeah.
heard it, but I've heard of it.
Tom Constantin is the only thing that was continuous with the Grateful Dead in that band. He was very briefly with the Dead in 69, 70. He had been a roommate of Phil Lesh's before that, before Phil had even joined the Dead. But the opening act was Holly Bowling. She sat down at a grand piano and started with China Cat Sunflower and kept moving through all of these different covers on a grand piano with her 10 fingers
Oh,
doing all the instruments.
ah, cool.
She's classically trained. She had
Hmm.
cut her teeth on Fish's tweezer, the Tahoe version that they had done,
Hmm.
called the Tahoe tweezer. But that was sort of broke her in 2014, I think. But I had never heard of her. This was 3 years before. Oh, but I guess it was 2017, maybe. Because John Cadlisic had told me on the steps of the Ardmore Music Hall that he was playing the next on August 2nd in DC. And so I had something else to do. She was also going to be opening the next night. And I wished I wasn't already booked at Gypsy Sally's to see John Kay's DC Mystery Cats.
Hmm.
I don't know if you know who he is, but he was the leader of the Dark Star Orchestra, the
Okay, that
original
sounds
them.
familiar.
And then he left them to join Further, which was Bob Weir and Phil Lesh's subsequent thing after they let the Dead go. They let their two drummers go and added Joe Russo and Elaine. But the story goes basically that I had no idea who she was and saw her play and was gobsmacked.
Mhm.
So whenever I could, I did what I could to support her. And during the pandemic, you were talking about how things changed for you in the pandemic and the podcast
Yes.
started coming up. She did these wilderness sessions where, with a sprinter van, her husband, who's a videographer, has drones and such, um, and her dog,
Nice.
Juno, went to all these different locations, Lake Tahoe or wherever, all these different national parks, and they'd set up no audience. She'd use a little zither to do the stuff she normally does inside the piano,
Hmm.
and um, just play. And then she'd air them every Thursday throughout the summer of the pandemic, and it
Hmm.
really helped get us through that. I felt, and
Nice.
so that's why I like to support the musicians. I'm part of that audience you're talking about that you all are really playing for, and pay it back, as much as
Yeah.
you can. If you're um, to the audience, if you're a music fan, do what you can to support the artist as directly as possible because they do get gouged by the record companies.
Oh,
There are
you're,
different
it's,
different modalities being used these days. I don't know if you've
mhm.
heard of Mycelia by Imogen Heap. As a
No.
way of, she's actually gotten some sort of music distributorship and on the blockchain to try to keep the artists, you know, owning their work. There are other efforts out there like Discipline Global Mobile. Have you heard of
Hmm.
that one?
No, no.
It's Robert Fripp's outfit for King Crimson
Okay.
to take
Okay.
ownership back from EMI,
Right.
Crimson
Yeah.
catalog. You may notice
Yeah.
that that's a lark's tongue as an aspect symbol. One of the
Okay.
classic albums from years ago. Um,
Yeah, there's like for so your listeners pull back the curtain a little bit here. You may not know this. When you download something, when you go to
mhm.
I don't want to use any names, but when you go to one of the large distributors and you pay your dollar for your download,
Mhm.
you know how much the artiste gets out of that dollar?
I Give me the figure.
1 penny.
If they're lucky.
No, one penny is what you get because like I will get a statement
I see.
every month from these various
Streaming service.
distributors, none of which I have ever signed up with. They just grab your stuff and start selling it without permission.
Wow.
And they get out of this by paying you 1 penny per track. Then they charge you tax.
Wow. So that's what's less than a penny
Yeah.
after
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. So if you're getting 1 million downloads, okay, maybe you're getting 100,000 out of that minus taxes. But if you're some, little banana like me, and I'm getting, 100 downloads or so in a really good month around the world, I'm looking at $10 that they're then charging me taxes on. So I'm ended up with, 3, 4, $5 at the end of that process. So that's why everything I've done independently, with the exception of Empty Pockets. And that's also why I'm not in the running for a lot of these awards, because those are usually through record companies. It's all a very little incestuous circle.
There are
One rich guy
athletes out
feeds the
there.
other rich guy, and then they split the profits, and they love it when the musicians die because then they don't have anybody to pay.
Yeah, of course. It's depressing.
Yeah, it can be, and that is why so many musicians, so many of your favorite musicians have died from drug overdoses, and they've died from alcohol, and they've died from car crashes and things. It's an old joke, but it's true. It's a hard way to make an easy living. It really is. I mean, I've never been in it to make money. I could have made a couple of decisions along the way if I wanted to go into a more commercial, so to speak, form of folk music, but I didn't like the idea of doing that. I want to do what I want to do, and a lot of that is because of my parents. My
Mhm.
father was a combat veteran in the Second World War. He was with the 101st Airborne,
I see.
uh, Screaming Eagle. Uh, he was in the Battle of the Bulge. He was in Bastogne at the Battle of the Bulge. He was wounded just after that. His brother was killed in Belgium almost the same time. They
Wow.
came home from the war. They had to give up. My father was in high school when he went into the military, as so many other people did in those days.
Mhm.
And they gave up their dreams. He wanted to go to college. He wanted to be a physical education major. He was a tremendous athlete, which is why he wanted to go into the airborne. He said,
Right.
those were I asked him why. I said, Dad, why the hell did you go into the airborne? That's like, he said, boy, they were the toughest of the tough, and I loved those jump boots. I wanted some of those jump boots. And as a matter of fact, um, I can't quite reach it, but I have his wings over here, and his jump wings over in the corner here.
I've got
But
my
I
grandfather's
saw,
dog tags too. Iron
yeah,
Man.
yeah, but I saw how much sacrifice went
Mhm.
into that. He never got to follow his dreams. My mother never got to follow her dreams. She wanted to go to college and learn to be an accountant. She was phenomenal with she's one of those people that numbers just ran through, joined together. She didn't have to write anything down. She just figured everything out in their head.
Mhm.
But like millions of other people of those days, they left their dreams behind in defense of a larger goal. And what I wanted to do with my life was what I wanted to do because they couldn't. And so that's why I didn't go into the old guard. I went to Disney, and my father did not talk to me for a year
Wow.
because I did not go into the old guard after he's telling all his buddies, down at the American Legion, yeah, my kid's gonna be honor guard, my kid's gonna do this, my kid's gonna do that, and I didn't.
Wow. The
But
old
for the
guard's a heck of a
last
gig.
Yeah, but for
But
the last
the
12, 15 years, they've been playing my instruments. So I am
exactly.
the old guard.
So you're really central to it. They wouldn't be
Yeah,
what they're
just
doing,
a
not
very
with those
different route.
10-hole pipes, which blow my mind every time I see one. And I hear them too. Of course, we have a great photograph from the Pride of America Fife and Drum Corps with all of our fifes stuck into the circle,
Hmm.
like peeler. And
Nice.
some of yours are there
Thank
as
you.
well, at least 5 or 6 of them,
Yeah.
old guard members who are
Yep.
marching with us. And that was brilliant. I hope we can do it again. You know what I kind of want to do is see if I can find some of these people who are local and just have a pickup fife and drum down in DuPont Circle.
Yeah, why not?
Because I
Why
think
not?
we could actually just set out a can and start panhandling.
What do they call these? What are they called? I'm an old man. Flash mobs. That's what you
Yeah,
should do.
flash
You
mobs.
should
Yeah.
do a flash mob. You should do a flash mob fife and drum, man.
And this Pride of America Fife and Drum was pretty much that.
Hmm.
Guy who organized it, one of the old guard, had only been in the community for a short time, he said. I don't remember exactly how long. Anyhow, I'm deviating now from something else that was in my brain to talk about that you were just talking.
Yeah, I do that to people.
You're, yeah, the record industry. I think there are models that are being tried out. There's a place called, what is it called? Is it going to come back to me? Bandcamp.
Hmm.
That apparently is getting the artists more for their work, buying their swag at shows, going and attending live music, being there. I'm sure that just spoiled for choice here in DC. I can go down to the Hamilton Live where I caught Holly Bowling the first time, and I'll run into artists I've never seen before. I can go down to the Anthem and catch some of the bigger acts, or the Atlantis, which has been recently built by Dave Grohl. Have you
Hmm.
played Dave Grohl?
Yeah, yeah, Dave Grohl, I know. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's some real good spirits in it, and but we do lose a lot too. And I remember seeing that Lock-in Festival 2019, I think it was, Neil Castle was playing with O'Teal and Friends, which was a
Hmm.
nice combination. They had a lot of mashup bands, right?
Okay.
And he committed suicide just shortly thereafter.
Ugh.
Depression apparently had him.
Yeah, yeah.
Good
I,
photographer. I got a book of his photography here, and I try to, fund these things. He's got a foundation in his memory.
mhm, yeah.
So support those things. Support everyone who's out there trying to make a living, giving us great art and literature and music. For me, I think that that's what's going to redeem the human, and what we remember. Right, the
Mhm.
politicians of the 19th century and such we don't remember so much, but we remember a lot of the composers who were coming through then.
Hell yeah.
I've
Mhm.
got I had Holly interview a guy I've never met before, but I see him play quite a bit, Reed Mathis, and
Mhm.
he had a organization that he called the J. Fred Jazz Odyssey,
Oh, nice name.
and he just picked up the bass, a lot like Victor Wooten. Are you familiar with Victor Wooten, Bela Fleck, and the Flecktones?
Okay, yep, yep.
Those guys.
Yeah, I met Bella one time in New York. That was pretty cool. Ended up at his apartment with a friend of mine I was playing with. Well, I was playing with this guy called Gerald Trimble, who played a 10-string cymbal, sitar. And we did a gig in New York, and he said, "Hey, look, man, we were invited to a party afterwards." I said, "Yeah, what?" He said, "Yeah, this guy Bella Fleck, he's living in New York now, and we can go hang out at his party." And I'd never heard of this guy. I said, Bella what? Okay, yeah, let's go. And rolled into the apartment, and it was just everybody who was anybody that had anything to do with bluegrass, newgrass, progressive Irish, all of this kind of stuff. And it was just a hellacious session. Just an amazing. I don't know any of the other musicians who were in the room, but everyone was just ridiculous. You know, that
But
session,
Bela,
I don't think we left till I mean, we showed up there at like 3 in the morning, I think. Yeah, that's when it like started.
that's New York, right?
That's New York. That's absolutely, because you do your gig and then you go to a session and there's an after session. And yeah, so we showed up there at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I don't think we left until the next day at about 10 in the morning. I mean, we were there playing nonstop for 24, 30 hours, something like that. And you didn't even notice it. It just, and no accelerants, no nothing. It was just, in there, the vibe and playing and one thing after the other. And it was, a lot of improvisation and things, because Bella does his own thing.
Yep.
And it's those are just for me, that's the reward in what I do. To be able to sit with you, we don't know each other, and we're sitting here talking about this stuff like we're old friends for 100 years, and that's the joy of the profession I'm in. That's the only thing I was hoping for, that I can keep doing it, that I could possibly make some recordings that would have some impact. People would like my ideas a little bit. The thing with Empty Pockets, again, nobody was doing stuff like that at that time. Nobody was mixing traditions and music and stuff like, because you played Irish music, you played Scottish music, or you played French Canadian. These folk traditions were all separate, and that album got vilified. And
Really?
oh my God, I was the Antichrist. I'm destroying traditional music. What am I doing? What is this guy? One guy actually wrote, "What does this idiot think he's doing, breaking down these barriers?"
Breaking down the
I'm
barriers.
trying to break down the barriers. I'm trying to
Next
have some fun.
question.
I'm playing with my buddies. This is what we put together. Hate it if you want. Okay, no big deal. Love it if you want to. Luckily, more people liked it than loathed it. And now it's like, if you're not doing that, people don't want to listen to it. Whereas when me and the Rare Air guys, we were kind of Stockton's wing, and we were really kind of pushing the boundaries a little bit about what folk music is. And we all kind of decided, well, folk music is music played by folks. There you go.
Sounds good. I want to take it a couple of different directions. One of the things about your fifes were used, I think, in Confluence. Have you got a copy of Throw Another Fife on the Fire by any chance?
No,
Or heard of it? No?
I, I've somehow I've heard of that, but I don't know why.
Well, Billy White put together a combination. Kara Loyal's in it. Do you know Dave Loyal and Kara?
Ah, that's why. Yeah. Okay.
And
Right.
Emily, I think, is in it as well.
Emily
Barone.
Maroon.
Yeah, yeah.
Emily has bought like a buttload of instruments from me. She really
She is
push it.
serious.
In fact, one of the fifes I was just working on, a private fife for a player in the old guard, is the same kind of one that I built for Emily. And this other woman saw it and started playing it. And said, "Oh my God, I love that. I have to have one like that." It was in a specialized kind of wood, and like my concept when I started my shop was a pizza parlor. There's a basic pie you can order.
Okay.
But then you can order a pie with this or that, or this topping, or that topping, or this size, or that size. I was very frustrated as a professional player at that time that I couldn't buy an instrument that I wanted. I couldn't approach a maker and say, and because I, talked with a few, well-known makers at that time, and said, "Look, I like your instrument, but could you modify it this way?" Because that's what me, Chalia, and Benoit did with Roy Seaman about the McDonough Fife. We sent him a couple of redesigns in the 10-hole fife, adding the thumb hole at the bottom, moving down the B flat hole so it was a louder, more in tune note. And Roy Seaman, god of piccolo building, said, "Yeah, sure, pay me. What do you want? No problem. That makes sense to me. That's a good idea, kid. Yeah, let me incorporate that into the instrument." So I thought, well, why can't I call a flute maker down around Virginia or another guy that lives in England and say, "Hey, could you modify this or that?" No, this is what I build. Play that. And so that pushed me a little more towards opening up my own shop where a player can approach me and say, "Look, is it okay if you make me a 8-hole fife, not a 10-hole fife? Or can you do this? Or could you use this wood instead of that wood? Or can you?" Yeah, man, bring it. What do you want? That's what I'm here to do. I want to build you what you want, not what I want to build for you. You know? What can I do for you? Let me help you out. Let's work together. Tell me your idea. I'll tell you if it's bullshit. You know, if it's a good idea, I don't want you wasting your money and I don't want me wasting my time. And I don't want anybody jumping on the internet, saying, hey, Skip Healy just swindled me out of this or that. There's none of those comments about me anymore, you
Well, that's
know?
good to hear. Yeah, I'm sure. And what a service to the musical community. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me. You also teach, right?
I do a lot of private teaching. I still do a lot of private teaching over here. Some with the fife, but a lot on the Irish flute. Irish flute music is very popular over here, or I should say, Irish music. Celtic music is very popular over here, and flute. Switzerland has a huge choral music tradition, and the flute being the closest sound to the human voice, which is why the flute was banned by the Catholic Church for a few hundred years. Um, yeah, yeah. I mean, the
I didn't
flute,
know.
oh, yeah, it's too close to the sound of the human voice, which is an insult to God.
Okay.
Seriously.
I did go
That,
to
that
Catholic school. That's
that's why the flute was not modernized until about 1865. The violin, they figured out several hundred years before that. The whole string family was figured out centuries before the flute became an instrument you could actually hear when you play it. And it was later built to be an in tune instrument, so you can play it with other instruments.
ah,
Yeah, I mean, Catholic priests played violin and concertina.
I see.
Later in the 20th century, you'll find like Father Charlie Cohn from New York City, who played concertina and flute.
Hmm.
But it was thought to be too close of an imitation of the human voice, and that's a no-go.
It's a wealth of information.
I am a vast font of virtually useless information, bro.
I have the same problem, people tell me, but I think giving me some stiff competition there, Skip.
I can go toe to toe with anybody, man.
Yeah, that's great. And
You know,
like you said, it's like we've been talking for years. And
my grandfather, my 105-year-old grandfather, told me something when I was a kid that made a big impact on me. He said, "Look," he said, "you have two ears and you have one mouth.
all right.
Listen twice as much as you talk."
Yeah,
And I spent a lot of time listening to a lot of really smart people, really normal people. You can learn something from that's the other thing my grandfather said. Everybody you ever meet's going to be able to teach you at least one thing. Listen to them.
that's right. Right.
And I have always, as a musician, I don't hang out with the young guys. I always hung out with the old guys. In Fife and Drum, I always listened to the Ed Olsons and the Roy Watrises and these people who had been around forever. In traditional Irish music, when I was living in Tipperary, when I was in my 30s, all my friends were in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. That's everybody. Because if you want to learn folk music, talk to the old guys, not the young guys.
Yeah, that's one of the things I try to do with the alumni is I talk to the older generation, I have to bridge it down to the younger generation because I want to be, conversant in all of it all the
Mhm.
way through. What I find is that it's kind of unusual because when we get together, oftentimes people are just talking with their clique within that.
Yeah.
Speaking of
Mhm.
a Swiss term for the
Exactly.
clique, is it?
Clique.
Clique.
Fasnacht Clique.
Fastnacht clique.
And,
We had a
and
Fastnacht thing here. Ran into some of the old guard people. Actually, Emily was there. Come to think of it, Barona, um, and it was down in Fairfax, Virginia. There's a little Swiss
mhm.
bakery or cafe down there. I hope they have it more often. I've only gone to it once, but it was so much fun.
Yeah.
I love
And
the style of
one
music.
other thing,
Just so bouncy, like you were saying. Go ahead.
Mhm. When you mentioned before about Colonial Williamsburg, how you had the three groups from the different eras that went together,
Right,
that's how the larger Fastnacht clique are broken down also. There's what they call the Binkies, which are the kids, the young
right.
group. Then there's what's called the Stammklicke, and that's the people who are active in the group and always playing. And then there's the
Stammtisch in German. Yeah,
yeah, and then there's the Altigart, and there's the 60 and over players, the genießers, as they say, the people, the enjoyers. zum Genießen, you
I
know?
don't know who I had lunch with, but I ran into some Swiss folks and ended up sitting at a table with them at a little chicken place, Peruvian chicken place across from George Mason University recently because they had here the, I guess it was called the Global Rudimental Drumming Association.
Uh-huh.
Um, the was it the American Rudimental Drumming Group was there too. I won their raffle for the silent auction for their one of the drums. And I just gave it to Dave Loyal. Contacted me, let me know I'd won it like month or two after I won it. I was like,
Mhm.
oh, I must think I'm stiffing them or something. But I got in touch with the guy who's in charge of that, Brendan Mason. I don't know
Oh,
if
yeah. Sure,
drums.
I know Brendan very well.
And Brendan wasn't even sure that his website was set up to take my donation, but I'd already paid it. And I didn't want a drum. I don't got no
Yeah.
room here for drums. So
Mhm.
off it went to Mark Riley,
Oh, yeah.
made it to the Washington Tattoo. Are
Nice.
you familiar with the Washington Tattoo at all? Do you
Yes, I
know?
am. Yep.
Okay, good, good. I'm sure they
Yep.
probably use a lot of your fifes.
Yep, probably. You know, it's funny. Let me tie a couple of things together
Please,
for you.
please.
We've been talking about Emily, and you mentioned George Mason University.
Yeah, I was there with them.
They have a fife and drum corps now. You know
I
why?
know.
Because
Yeah,
Emily
Bob
got them to
Devine.
buy, they bought my fifes.
Yeah, and Bob Devine's behind that, I think. I think he was one of the
Yep.
instigators of it. He was also trying to start one called the Washington City Fife and Drum Corps.
Hmm.
I tried to sit in with them and I couldn't find time to practice. I live in a dorm, not dorm, but a bunker here, condo in DC, and my neighbors would really object if I practiced.
Yeah.
So I just can't
Yeah.
hang. I can get in with a bunch of fifers of the alumni of the Fife and Drum Corps and march with them. And of course, we're in these old pitch fifes
Hmm.
were specially made for them with the even holes, based on a probably a 19th century fife in the collection. My
Hmm.
mother was the registrar for the Department of Collections for 32 years, so she could get us access. And one of our leaders and me, we got in there and looked at all the fifes they had in the collection and photographed them and such and measured them very carefully against things that we had from our Cooperman fifes. Anyhow, yeah, tying that together, Emily was at that same conference at George Mason, and it was just a blast. I had so much fun meeting people and listening to other people and meeting some of the British guys for the first time.
Hmm.
We've known each other through the Fife and Drum Corps fans for years. Like you, it's been a member now for 13 years. I noticed. I had to look you up, see if you're actually a member, and I was like, "Oh, he is a member." I've got 13 years, really? Great. And what I like to do, I consider myself to be like a node on a non-hierarchical network.
Hmm.
And I pick up signals, and like a good Fifer, I amplify them.
Hmm.
And you were talking in the Ian Anderson interview you did on Every
Yes.
Pocket. So I want to talk about your podcast a little bit.
Thank you.
And at the end of it, I think you said, let's make some noise. Right.
Hmm.
And I
Yep.
just love that attitude because I do think that we need to transmit signals through the noise of cyberspace and
Hmm.
culture generally to focus on what we have in common versus what divides us. One thing about fifing and drumming that I find, and you probably are aware of this too after being a musician, my individuality just tends to drop away. And when you're well practiced, the muscle memory takes over. The fingers
Yep.
know where they need to go. The notes play themselves, it
Yep.
feels like. And I love that feeling. I got it again when I fell in with the Fife and Drum alumni, probably first in 2003, I think, for one of our Williamsburg community Christmas parades. And I didn't do it very often. And then there was Drummer's Call, and eventually I started doing that. Do you familiar with the Drummer's Call that we have in May in Williamsburg?
I've heard, I've never been to
Education.
it. I've heard, yep. Hmm.
I hope someday you'll be able to be there because that would be a lot of fun. And with one of your Fife and Drum corps you're working with, because those are, I think they can even be better than they are at times.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
wonderful to see other people who are fascinated by this. We have
Yeah.
such one thing I think the alumni tend to not do as much as I would like to see them do. Maybe we'll do it more. Is play to our audience
Yes.
like we are a clica, right? So
Hmm.
basically are kind of insular and we don't necessarily reach out to our audience as much, but we have fans,
Yeah.
a lot of them who like fifing and drumming. And I think that the culture needs to be amplified. Getting
Yeah.
back to your podcast, I did watch the first episode and part of the second, I think, with Ian Anderson. I wondered how you managed to land him, of all people, as your first.
Yeah, so do
Tell
I.
me the rest.
Yeah, actually, so I had the idea to start a podcast, and I spoke with a friend of mine named Stefan, who is into television, not so much movies, but he does a lot of work for Swiss television,
Cool.
on the production side, on the film side, on the design side. So, all around. And I was talking with him about my idea to do this. And he said, that sounds fascinating. Um, and we've done a couple of things in the past. So I said, well, he's starting his own production company. And I said, well, look, how about, we throw in and we, see if we can, light this candle. And so we decided we would, try to do a podcast. And then I came up with the format that I wanted to do. And then I get a phone call. Well, my phone rings, I look and I see it's Stefan. And yeah, hi Skip, how are you? Yeah, good. He said, hey, I have a question for you. I said, yeah. He said, I think I might have a guest for the podcast. I said, oh, okay, okay. Who? He says, have you ever heard of Ian Anderson? And I said, Ian Anderson from Jethro Tull? Ian Anderson? Because he knows it's going to be a folk music podcast. So I'm thinking he knows some folk player named Ian Anderson. Oh, what a coincidence. Oh, funny. He said, yeah, that guy. I said, well, yeah, I know who he is. I'm a big fan of the early music. It was really influential on me.
Mhm.
And he says, well, they got a couple concerts coming up, and Stefan works in a production company at the moment. And he says, there's some media slots available. And I instantly thought of you. I said, well, Stefan, I've done thousands of interviews, but I've never asked the questions. He says, yeah, exactly. It's going to be great. Okay. And so then I figured out what he meant. I would ask, hopefully, questions from a musician's perspective. And since Tull was an influence, the early stuff, Minstrel in the Gallery, Songs from the Woods, and earlier, was such an influence on me, he thought, well, maybe you can come up with some questions, a little left of center here. And I thought, well, damn, yeah, well, let's give this a shot. So I had 36 hours to get ready for that interview. And so what I did was I had already heard a lot of interviews with him. And what I thought is, God damn, these things are all so pedestrian. It's the same 6 questions about Jethro Tull over and over. No wonder the guy hates doing interviews,
He did
And
seem
I
a little
know.
hesitant at first.
Oh, at first, because he doesn't know who I am, and
Oh, he
what you'll
doesn't.
when you look, behind the scenes is the very beginning before we started recording when Stefan introduced us, and I said, "Oh, hello and happy St. Patrick's Day." And Ian goes, "Oh, St. Patrick's Day. Oh, I'm Scottish and we don't really do St. Patrick's Day." And so immediately I see I'm getting dismissed by this guy. And so I thought, man, I better have a good first question. And what
Mhm.
I knew about Ian Anderson, when he wishes to be, he's rather verbose. He's not afraid to express his opinions, and
Mhm.
his opinions take a while to be expressed. And so I thought, I got a 10-minute slot with this guy. So let me approach this. Let me bring up what I hear is English folk revival as being the heart and soul of Jethro Tull, that they didn't go the first album was a little bit of blues, Locomotive Breath,
Right, right, with Mick
that kind of
Abrams. Yeah.
deal, you know. But it has such an English folk revival, and I had played with, I'd met Dave Swarbrick and Matty Pryor, and
Okay.
these rocks of the English folk revival. And so
Mhm.
I wanted to approach it that way, because he sees himself as European. Of course, he's not American, and he wanted the band to be based in music that he was familiar with. Not that he's a great fan of folk music, but he was very familiar with the folk revival of the 60s, because that's right when he was forming his band. And he very quickly decided after it started that they wanted to have more of that folk revival sound intimated, not built around it, but if you know what to listen for, it is
Right.
clearly there, you know? So that's how I wanted to approach it. And when I started doing it that way, his attitude changed immediately. Like I say, I had a 10-minute slot. We had a 45-minute Zoom schedule, but he was only obliged to stay for 10 minutes. And he stayed literally to the last 3 seconds that was allotted for the Zoom chat. So I just felt in my heart he was liking this. And he clearly told some stories for the first time. That the story about Galway and all of that stuff, and Lemmy's guitar that he traded in, and like all of
Right.
that he'd never told before as stories. And what was killing me, because the interview came through this production company, I couldn't do anything with it right away. I recorded that on March 17th,
I see.
and I couldn't do anything with it until almost May, 2 weeks before he was playing in Switzerland. So I'm sitting on this, and then because he told me the story, he started telling the story in a much shorter version in some
Mm.
other interview. So I kind of got scooped on which was, oh my God, it was killing me, because I figured out how to talk to him, how to get this stone to open up a little bit and actually laugh a few times by the
Yeah.
by the end of the interview. So I figured I need 7 questions. I need 6 questions that he's going to find interesting, that he'll want to give expansive answers to. And then I ask a question, and I just, shut up, shut up and listen to the man. And he really spoke as Ian Anderson, not the flute guy from Jethro Tull. I mean, he was really getting into some very, very personal things and really opening up in a way I'd never heard in any other interviews. So I'm very proud of that interview. It's my first interview I'd ever done, and starting off with Ian Anderson, who doesn't like talking to people, who admits, I don't like people very much. you know? And what was great, he said, I think in the second episode, at one point, we're talking about Jethro Tull and concerts, and he said, I'd rather be home with a cup of tea. You know, I don't become that guy until 10 seconds before I step on stage.
Yeah.
That guy's not me. That's my public affectation. That's not me. I'd rather be home with a cup of tea, looking at my horses.
And he's a pretty good businessman too, from what I
He
understand.
is a very
A lot of good
he's
things.
not a dumb guy, dude. He's not a dumb guy. He is very, very he really I don't know if you knew
And
John Charles
community minded
much.
too.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I don't know if you ever knew John Chalia very much, but he really reminded me of John Chalia. I mean, the
Tell me more.
cadence and how he speaks, the range that his voice is in, the intellectualism in his answers. He speaks off the cuff, but it's about things he's really thought in depth about. So I personally found it to be very interesting little chat between
Right.
two people. And when I said to him about my Empty Pockets album, that he was really the inspiration for it, from mixing progressive rock with English folk revival. That's the thing that sparked in me from a very young age the idea of, why can't you play guitars with fifes? Why can't you play some fiddle? They certainly played fiddles with fifes back in the day, you
Sure.
know? Well, I don't think I'm reinventing the wheel here. I think I was, maybe expanding a little bit a concept that goes way back, but kind of got walked away from.
Yeah. Well, tell me more about John. I'm not familiar with him.
Well, John Chalia, was a very, very, very high quality fife player, very high level fife player. He was a classically trained musician. Went to Lindenwood College out in St. Louis
Okay.
during the Vietnam War. It was largely to stay here, not there. You know, because if you were in college with passable grades at that time, you were exempt from the draft for quite a while, except towards the end of the war. Then they started grabbing, everyone they could.
Right.
So John told me one time, he could either be an okay classical flute player or an exceptional fife player. And he decided to be an exceptional fife player.
Huh, how about
And
that?
then in the early 19s, kind of mid 1970s, he was really into Beethoven, Bach, that period of class, this what's called contrapuntal harmony, where it's rhythms and things going against each other, very complex stuff. He was fascinated with that stuff. And just as a joke, really as a joke one day, he started arranging a couple of just, Fisher's hornpipe, Devil's flute, O'Connor's, Downshire. Like those were the original John Chalia arrangements. And he was living in Brantford, Connecticut at that time. And he needed a couple of other players to play this stuff with him. And so he was friends with John Benoit. He knew John while John was in the Old Guard, and then Benoit was cycling out of the Old Guard, with Randy, all of this exodus in the mid 70s from the real drum corps guys, American Fife and Drum Corps guys that were in the Old Guard, who all came out and went back into Fife and Drum and formed F Troop and did all of that stuff. But he started just messing around writing these arrangements. We met in Deep River, and he somehow saw some talent there, something that could be expanded on. He needed somebody really strong to play the lead voices. And I was always, loud and confident in what I did. So he thought, yeah, that's probably going to be a good fit. And then Benoit, I cannot read music well at all. I learned everything by ear.
Oh,
Benoit was also a classical style musician in that Benoit really wanted to be a orchestral flute player. And he worked and worked and worked and worked and worked and was at the point where he was receiving offers to audition with symphony orchestra. But he was a drum corps guy, Benoit. And so it started with the three of us in John's house. He was, shared a house with his mother. His father had moved out at that point. Um, and I was like, I don't know, 15 years old. And John Benoit would drive down from Uxbridge, Massachusetts to East Greenwich. And then we jump in my car. I had a learner's permit at that time. And we would drive down to Chalia's house in Brantford. And we would just play through these things, just having fun with no idea from Chalia, of eventually writing hundreds, if not thousands, of arrangements of traditional and original tunes. So that's where my real development started kicking in as a fife player. And when John started hearing the arrangements and realizing stuff's not so bad, Bonaparte Crossing the Rhine, for example, another one of his earliest arrangements,
wow.
that fired him up to start doing more arrangements, fired me up because I'm going to be playing lead on all of this stuff. And Benoit also, that got John Benoit's interest in composition and arrangement going as well. So it was kind of this awakening that happened. We were all very influenced by this group called the New York Regimentals. Again, this is this John McDonough we were talking about earlier. They did a couple of recordings, the most famous one called 200 Years of Fife and Drum in America. And this was a recording of the New York Regimentals, who at that time had set the record for the most wins in the Northeastern, which is the highest level of competition in New England fife music. So they had won like 7 years in a row,
Hmm.
and they played a lot of harmonies, but they played a lot of kind of what we call block harmonies, where there's two or three people playing just intervals, and that kind of in a drone-like fashion was supporting the music. And then McDonough's arrangements started getting more complex in that he was doing more movement. There were more duet sound with block harmony underneath. And we were all addicted to that album. That woke everybody up about, oh, gee, goddamn, look at this stuff you can do with fife music. And then Chalia thought, well, I'm a trained musician and I can, and he then started really fleshing out his arrangements and just got, up to his neck in arranging. And the more he started arranging, the less melody he played, the more harmonies he started playing because he would always write. We played as a duet a lot and it was very competitive. We were great friends, but it was, I'm better than you. No, I'm better than you. Oh, the
All
melodies.
right.
No, the harmony's more important. Ah, there's no use for harmony without a melody. Ah, the harmony makes the melodies. So it was that kind of dynamic, really pushing each other to extreme levels. And we did a lot of street busking around the country. And so that is where John Chalia really started doing all of these arrangements and slowly but surely starting to change the concept a little bit of fife playing and fife arrangements for the fife and started getting people more pointed in a classical direction than an old-timey fife and drum martial music direction. So it turned into a bit more the chamber music style as opposed to the kind of blood and guts stuff that he and I did, as a duet out on the street. And so that's why and then that brings, Middlesex County Volunteers. He and John Benoit did a lot of their arrangements. And so a lot of the major groups started doing more three-part, four-part harmonies in their fife arrangements. And John, there was a man called Bob O'Brien that played in the Ancient Mariners way back. He's the guy who wrote the company prayer that's always recited at the musters. And Bob O'Brien played with the New York Regimentals. And in fact, he played most of the hardest things on that 200 Years album because McDonough was playing harmonies on a lot of those things. He wasn't playing first. Jimmy Douglas and Bob O'Brien and these guys were playing the higher voices on that. A lot of people think that was McDonough doing that stuff. He played very little of the first voice. He was doing a lot of the harmony things because he had his concept of what he wanted these harmonies to sound like. So when Bob O'Brien started playing with the Mariners, John Chalia at that time, as were the Mariners, as was most of drum corps, were playing Clues fifes. And Bob O'Brien said to Chalia, "No, this is what you want to play." And Obi handed Chalia his first McDonough fife.
Gotcha.
And John Chalia, I said to him when we were all made honorary Jaybirds. That was the last time I saw John before he died. The Jaybird ceremony at the Company of Fifers and Drummers Hall. One of the things I said in my comments in front of John was he gets absolutely zero credit for introducing and really pushing the McDonough fife into fife and drum corps, which started changing the sound of fife sections because all of a sudden you could hear them, especially in Connecticut Valley drum corps, because John taught several of the Connecticut Valley groups in the early 70s. And it was a condition of having him as a teacher. Your corps has to switch over to McDonough fifes. 6-hole, 10-hole, I don't care. You want me to teach you, you're going to play this kind of fife.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
Wow.
so he is the one that really brought the McDonough fife into New England fife and drumming as opposed to New York City fifing and drumming, where all of the groups were already playing the McDonough fife because of the New York regimentals.
Gotcha. Hmm. That's impressive. I was thinking when you're talking about the compositions and such, I mentioned earlier, Throw Another Fife on the Fire. That was Billy
Mhm.
White's Confluence, is the
Mhm.
name of his group. And I don't know what he's done with that since, if anything. He's also part of the Washington Tattoo now. And
Yep.
to have Mark Riley on soon to talk about their efforts. Did you hear about
Oh, great. Tell them hello.
did you hear about the tattoo they had here in Washington? They had the Listener Auditorium where
Okay.
Columbus
Wow.
was recovered, or was recorded for Little Feat years ago. That was, one of the seminal pieces for our bus tour to Canada in 1979 was Little Feat's Waiting for Columbus.
Oh,
But
wow.
um, there in the Listener Auditorium, he had so many artists, and Billy was the producer, and Bill White was outside afterwards. I was talking to him a little bit. Um, but in any case, and John Parks, that's the name I was looking for.
All right.
And then John, he was there with the old guard performing. And wow, that was just an incredible number of different types of musicians. So you had pipe and drum, of course, in addition. And they had a band that kind of tickled me, and it sounded like one of your crossovers that you were talking about earlier. It's called the Rolling Drones. Have you seen them yet?
No, I haven't. I like the name though.
Rollin' Drones. Yeah, they've got a player named Anna Smart on bagpipe,
Hmm.
and they're doing covers of things like what is that song? I bought my first real six string, found it in the five and
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
things like that. I
Nice. I like it.
think they did Highway to Hell as well.
Oh, cool. Oh yeah, that'd be
They have a
brilliant
guy on
advice.
guitar, drummer, and the whole
Hmm.
sort of rock and roll kind of thing, a female vocalist, and then Anna on her bagpipes. They went over
Nice.
to a pub not long far from the listener, and there's a little clip out there on YouTube of Anna on one of the tables playing the bagpipes in the pub.
Ah, cool.
She's very, very amusing to watch. I've been having her played out on, and the Roland Drones generally played out on KSKQ in Oregon, giving them a little bit of amplification. I don't know how many
Great.
people listen to KSKQ in the Rogue Valley, but I understand its signal travels down into Northern California. So
Oh,
who
cool.
knows?
Good reach.
I'm always trying to make amplification of signal. Anyhow, what else do I want to say about all that? That was very interesting history, though, and I appreciate it because I don't know these things, right? I'm
Hmm.
down there in Williamsburg, and well, I guess as you're the world's greatest fifer, I'd like to get your opinion if you've heard, for instance, a half century of quarter notes, which was part of our Drummers Call DVD set of the Williamsburg Fife and Drum Corps arrangements.
I have not heard it. I'm sorry to say, but if you can hook me up with some, I would be
Good.
more than happy to listen to it.
Have you listened to any of their stuff before?
Only when I was very young
Hmm.
and with the Colonial Williamsburg records, that was
Right.
also very influential to me because that was attainable. That was music I could play. And that's really the first stuff, the first drum corps music I was learning by ear, and I was able to play along with the
Right.
album, which again, that's how I learned almost I just consume albums,
Yeah.
especially in those days. I buy an album, I learn everything on it. I buy the next one, I learn everything on that. That's how I learned my first 500 or so traditional Irish tunes. It was just
Uh,
buying albums and smoking a bunch of dope and listening through Koss headphones, memorizing every tune I heard.
I know that the America's First Army album, I think, has some fife and drum and the banjo
Yeah,
stuff from George Carroll's generation on it. And then
yeah.
you get the Colonial Fifes and Drums of Colonial Williamsburg, I think is the next one, which has sort of a line drawing on it, I think, done by.
Yes, that's the exact one I had. There's kind of a not watercolor, but almost pastel colored,
Right, right,
with
exactly.
a Fifer on the front. Yep,
I
yep.
think Vernon Wooten did that illustration. His son was one of our drummers, a little younger than me, and was Colonial Williamsburg's artist. Yeah, that was recorded in the old Fife and Drum building that I was telling you about with the crumbling tiles and such,
Oh,
and
yeah, yeah.
it was echoey
That'd be a
acoustic
great name for a band.
crumbling tiles.
Crumbling Tiles.
Yeah, there are all kinds of all the great band names have not been taken, but
They've not been taken yet, man.
yeah, there's an old Onion article that says, but if that keeps you from forming a band, good. But anyhow, um, the other one that came out right after that, I forget what the title was, but it was something similar. Fifes and Drums of Colonial Williamsburg has a picture of my generation's Sergeant Major Lance Pettigo in the powder magazine against a bunch of muskets. I think that
Mhm.
was the third major album we put out.
Well, as you keep referring to me from the quote as the world's greatest fifer,
Yeah,
you can refer to Mark Riley as the world's greatest drummer
I
because
think you can.
there was an article written about him over in the Basel newspaper some years ago, and that was the title of the article, "The World's Greatest Drummer."
He is a great human being generally. And
Yeah,
Washington Tattoo is doing so much for veterans who have PTSD,
that's great.
putting sticks in the in your hands and
Thank God somebody is.
you can work it out, you know. One of the things I'm doing with Harrowings, which is the name of this podcast, for breaking up the surface to make the field suitable for creative work, um, is to sort of process out my grief around my father's passing. And I decided that I didn't really want to, go back to a therapist or something. So I booked a vocal coach, and we're working through the King Crimson Songbook.
Great. I love
Epitaph,
it.
right?
Hmm.
Some people
Nice.
will be my epitaph. I fear, but that's a prophetic thing, and we worked through that, and we worked through a lot of other stuff. But I ran into Sunny, kind of an interesting little story there. I'll just back it up and tell a little bit of this. She's the first person I interviewed on this podcast.
Hmm.
I met her in person at the 8 by 10 when she was fronting a thing called Legion of Jerry instead of Legion
Nice. I
of
like
Jerry.
it. Yeah.
It's a combination of Better Off Dead and the Jerry Tripsters.
Cool.
And sort of mashed together and they become the Legion of Jerry. They've done like, I don't know, 5 or 6 shows. But there's so many cover bands out there. And we met actually because I bought tickets for Les Claypool's Fearless Flying Frog Brigade, which featured Sean Lennon in addition
Okay.
to Les Claypool and Primus. And I also had tickets at the same time for the Lincoln Theater's Remain in Light show, which I'd seen twice already. But
Mhm.
I decided to go over and I had like VIP tickets, so I was going to do the meet and greet with Adrian Belew and Jerry Harrison of the Talking Heads, and the backup band was the former Turquoise minus the founder of Turquoise. Um, they call themselves now Cool Cool Cool. Interesting band name.
Yep.
So I got to see those guys instead, and I floated the ticket for Les Claypool's show and the Baltimore thing, and Sonny snapped it up when I was up in Philadelphia for the last Dead and Company tour show. Um, and it was just kind of being starstruck because I'd seen Sonny with a thing called Sticky Fingers, which is all these female vocalists, women who rock in the DC metro area,
Nice.
doing all this Rolling Stone stuff. And she really impressed me. So she's my vocal coach now, and I've worked through that with the music. I don't do a lot of fifing though, unfortunately. Um, I may do that pickup thing though in the DuPont Circle or something like that if I can find enough flash mobbers to do it, like we were
Yeah,
talking
why
about.
not, man?
Let's see what happens. I want to catch up with your podcast more. Tell me about the Snug too, and your different
Okay.
subscriptions to your podcast because I think
One
I should
thing
sign up.
that that's always fascinated me. Um, so I started working at Disney World when I was 17 years old.
Right.
So I got exposed to production and production values
Oh,
very young.
yes.
And the very cool thing, so at that time, it was only as what I always called the tragic kingdom, not the magic kingdom. But it was just, the main park, and there were the contemporary and the Polynesian hotels, and there was Fort Wilderness. That was everything of Disney. There was no Epcot. There was none of these satellite parks. Everything else was swamp because it is Florida, and Florida is basically swamp. And one thing about Disney World, you may have heard the rumors, and the rumors are true. There's a huge tunnel system that goes all underneath the park,
Wow.
wide enough that golf cars, two-bys, can go through there. So there's a large employee parking lot. Come to the parking lot, and there's a bus, shuttle bus, that then brings you to the beginning of the tunnel. And when I was there, a lot of the tunnel was not even painted. Okay. Now it's, Disney World is, the Frontierland and Tomorrowland and all of these different lands. And the tunnel eventually was painted to reflect what land you were under. But when
Interesting.
I was first there, all the walls were white. So you had literally no idea where you had to memorize how far to go down and then what stairway to go up because you never see, they call them cast members. You never see cast members from Liberty Square in Tomorrowland. There's no wrong costume anywhere in the park. That's because of this tunnel system.
Hmm.
Because the Disney's idea was he didn't want to break the fantasy. You
Right.
know, you're in this world, you're in that world. That's why it's Disney World, you know? So there were times you would get dropped off and you go in and there's huge cafeterias, huge wardrobe department, break rooms, this literal city underneath Disney World. And if you didn't know what doorway to go up, you'd end up in the wrong land and you could very, quickly get fired for that. So I was really interested at first and wow, look at all of this. This is behind the scenes, man. This is how this place works. And that really sparked my interest in how production wise things are made. So I've worked in television. I've done some movie things and, a lot of things. And I'm always interested in backstage. These guys are having a fight to the death on screen and they're drinking a coffee and laughing about stuff backstage. So the idea of the snub is to take the raw footage of an interview with someone from when Stefan and I see each other and we talk, and it's the pure uncut version of the entire interview with whoever the interview was done with. Like there's some things that are cut out of the Ian Anderson interview, like that very beginning that we edited up a little bit, we cleaned that up a little bit. So you still see a little bit of an edge, but you don't know why there was an edge to it. Well, when you go into the snug and you watch the beginning of the interview, you see exactly why there was a little edge to the interview.
Like
So
St.
I
Patrick's Day. Hmm.
yeah, so I always love this behind the scenes look of in the production what happened and how it was done and what were the bumps and how did they smooth out the bumps and all. So that's a little bit the idea with the snug. I mean, it's already a large investment in time to watch the podcast. They're on average about 40 minutes long or so because I do an interview and then I do a musical tip, at the
Right.
at the end of it. And so that's the idea of the snug is it's a behind the scenes look at how this program was just made.
Wonderful. Well, this is going to be like a snug, I think, because I don't think I'm going to edit it a bit. I'm just going to put it
Good
as
man.
it is. And I do have little bumps in there. I feel like I deviate in my storytelling sometimes. You know, that thing about the Bela Fleck party in New York, you were telling.
Yep.
That was really wonderful. And I don't know the other musicians who were in the room with you, but I kind of wonder if some of them weren't members of the
Well,
Wheat.
it was the Flecktones. It was certainly everybody that's in the Flecktones. And
Well,
then it was hmm?
one of them, or actually two of them, the
Okay, two of them. Yeah.
drummer is Future Man, also
Oh,
known
shoot.
as Roy Wooten, and he's
Hmm.
developed his own instruments. He's a
Hmm.
and Victor Wooten, his brother, is a bass player.
Okay.
Victor's one of the best bass players on the planet, I think.
Wow.
Maybe some other people would debate that. I've seen a lot of great bass players. I've been
Hmm.
kind of fascinated with them. I own a couple. I'm not a player though, to speak of. I like to plunk around. But these two guys and their brother Reggie, who they call the teacher, and Joseph, who's been 30 years now plus with the Steve Miller Band on the keys. He's called the
Hmm.
Hands of Soul.
Hmm. I
Um,
played at Steve Miller's house one time.
oh, there you go. So there's another connection. These guys all grew up first in California when they
Yep.
started playing together when they were very young. They opened for War when Victor was like 2 or something,
Wow.
something like that, really young. Reggie started teaching him when he was 10. And I've had Reggie on another thing we were trying to start up called Amplified Healing with my physical trainer that I was working with for a few years during the pandemic. But we did, that's kind of sputtered out. I just couldn't do it because I don't really have the credentials as a physical therapist. So I was just like
Mhm.
a voice, and I didn't really feel when we were taking forever to get it off the ground. So anyway, Reggie is a great raconteur. He's got really interesting ideas about the record industry and music and how it should be. He likes to associate music and mysticism.
Nice.
Really out there stuff sometimes, but it's entertaining as hell.
Well,
And
there you go. That works.
for me personally, my wife has different opinions. We took a test. I came up 100% hippie. My wife came out 0% hippie.
Oh, there you go.
Back when I first went to Locken Festival in 2014, I came back and I wanted to do more of it, and I started getting more and more over into this collection behind me and such. And she said, "What happened? When I married you, you were not a deadhead." And it's true. I wasn't. I had gone to a couple of shows in '84, hitchhiked from Ashland to Charlotte and back again to Richmond to see him again, and then that was enough.
Mhm.
Uh, anyhow, so the Wooten brothers grew up just down the road from us in Denby, and they were part of the Busch Gardens Country Band. You know, Busch
Mhm.
Gardens, the old country,
Yep.
amusement park right next door to
Yep.
Williamsburg. And my buddy Lance, he was of Poison Dwarf and formerly led the Fife and Drum Corps in Williamsburg and it developed Drummer's Call, actually. It was his brainchild. He replaced Future Man as a drummer in the country band. So kind of connected. I went to see these guys over at the Pearl Street Warehouse down on the wharf in DC with Lance, and we had the VIP tickets, so we were doing the meet and greet thing. And before Lance could even say anything, Victor reaches out to him and says, "I know you. You're a drummer, right?" And that was good. He put
Nice.
a picture of them, Lance did, on his phone of them in their Busch Gardens costumes, and was
Mhm.
able to hand it up to the stage when they were doing their Q&A with the crowd. And some of the things you said really sounded a lot like what Victor was saying and the other
Oh,
brothers. Um, he put that, from the screen up onto the big screens in the club so
mhm.
people could see it. So that was a nice touch. I was glad I brought Lance along because I'm like nobody, but I enjoy connecting people. That
Yeah.
catalyzation when you bring two people together, you know, if anything happens at all, both are transformed. I think Carl Jung.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's one of
You
my
know, when I
very
was
goals.
uh, we mentioned about the Bella Fleck party.
Yeah.
I was really fortunate to be involved in one other thing that happened in New York.
Yeah.
Back when I was working in Disney World originally in the 70s, I was living in a trailer park that was called Hidden Village. And two of the trailers next to me had these musicians that had been brought in from Disneyland in California to establish a couple, what we call atmosphere bands
Wow.
in Disney. And these were some really big time players. There was a clarinet player called Jimmy Allen who was really big back in the big band era. But there were some jazz guys. One was a horn player called Martin Banks, who played with the Maynard Ferguson big band for years and years and years. And another guy who ended up being one of my best friends down there was named Leroy Cooper, the
Hmm.
Hog, they called him. Leroy was about 5 foot tall and 5 foot wide, dressed like a pimp from Chicago, double-breasted suits, the hat, big cigar, the whole deal, all the time. 100-degree Florida weather didn't matter. He was going to look good wherever Coop went. He was Ray Charles' band leader
Wow.
for like 25 years, 30 years.
Wow.
And then I left Florida, moved up to Connecticut, and one day I get a phone call, and it was Leroy Cooper.
Hmm.
And he's like, hey, buddy, what are you doing? It's not too much, Roy. What's up, big hog? He's like, well, look, I got a little gig coming up in New York City. You want to come? You want to come down? Come on down and hang out with me, man. I haven't seen you for a long time. We gotta smoke. We gotta burn one, man. I haven't seen you for a while. So yeah, Coop, where are you playing? He said, well, I'm doing this thing called Saturday Night Live. I said, really? You're doing Saturday Night Live? He said, well, Ray Charles is doing Saturday Night Live, and we're putting the old band together, and so I got to lead the band. So come on down to the recording. Come on down, hang out. Let me teach you. Let me introduce you to all the boys. So on the episode where Ray Charles was on Saturday Night Live
Mhm.
with his band, I was backstage
All right.
because Leroy the Hog invited me up to it, and then we went to I don't remember much of it, but we went to a hell of a party afterwards.
Well, I bet. What year was it? Do you remember? What?
I think that's probably around 78. Some I don't think it
I
was in
might
the
have
eight.
it on DVD, so I might.
Oh yeah, it's
Got
got to
some.
be there.
I
Yeah,
got
that was one of their big episodes.
because
But yeah,
that was good, right?
that was real good.
I haven't watched it in a long time, but I don't think it's what it was when I was in high
Yeah, well, that was back in
school.
the Belushi and
I was
Aykroyd
15.
days. Hmm.
I was 15 then. So I was
Yeah,
just tuning in.
uh,
15 is where it all went wrong, really. Anyway, um, we covered a lot of ground. I wanted to ask you, was George Carroll at Disney World when you were there?
oh, that's a very funny story. I don't want to. So he approached Disney with the idea that you need a
Right.
fife. If you're going to have Liberty Square, you got to have a fife and drum corps. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea. So they put a drum corps together. He put the drum corps together, sourced all the music for it, got a set of Seutzmann drums,
Mhm.
which they were playing down there at the time. And then he disappeared.
I see.
Like we didn't see him for years. I mean, he was around, doing all of his things, but he got paid every week.
Oh,
Yeah, we
interesting.
called him what was it, code 402 because he got $402 a week salary,
Mm.
and which was serious money in
Yeah.
1975, 76. That was good money. But he was probably at that time really involved with Williamsburg, and he was getting the old guard going, and
Wow. So
all,
he's
all
spending
of
his
that
time.
kind of stuff. So he would check in. Each band has what's called a lead,
Yeah.
the boss of the band. There's lead and sub lead. So he was checking in with this guy, Pat Doyle, who was the lead of the band a lot, but he physically wasn't there because we had the music library. We had, everything. And these guys were professional percussionists. They weren't, there was one guy down there who's one of the best drum corps drummers of all time named Jim Plout. And he's still down there.
Wow.
But so we didn't see George a lot. The last time I saw George is when they did away with the original Fife and Drum Corps, and he came down to argue with management
Mhm.
about keeping the drum corps. So that's actually the first and last time I met George was then in about 1977 or so. I think that was.
Gotcha. I was last met him, and probably first and last time actually I really talked to him was at Billsburg Brewery, which is a place down near Jamestown, where we hang out after the shows and such. When we were having our 60th anniversary, and we were having a little jam session down there, and I went up and spoke to him briefly. So our 60th anniversary was in 2018. Yeah, it was a good life, being a
Mhm.
Fifer and
Oh
having
yeah.
all that history behind us. And George's method of fifing and drumming was very different than what John Moon brought from the British Army. And yeah, there's a great little, I don't know if you've heard the Bottom of the Glass podcast.
No.
No, it's done by a bunch of guys. Dave Loyle's one of the people was on this one,
Mhm.
and they interviewed John Moon. Um, I think within a year of his death. And that was worth the price of admission. I'll send you a link.
I'm sure. Yeah.
But I probably ought to wrap it up, Skip. I've kept you
Okay.
for
So
2 hours,
wow,
52
almost
minutes.
three. Wow.
You
One
can
thing about
really?
Dave Loyal, when I closed up my shop in Rhode Island and I
Mhm.
opened my shop here, Dave Loyal bought my machines.
I'm not surprised. I went down and toured that with him, and I was shocked by just the sheer amount of technology that man has down there.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
amazing. He has
Yeah.
something there. He had to swear he wasn't going to enrich uranium with it to the government before he
I
could
believe it.
use it. Oh man, that place is beyond me. Um,
Oh, I'm sure.
I
I'm
went
sure.
down there just after I got laid off from the gig here and started the foundation and with the idea of doing some professional photography. And I looked at his setup and I was like, oh, giving that up. I'll
Yeah.
find other
Yeah.
things to do with my time and my energy. I'm doing more writing now, and a lot of the writing is actually starting to be autobiographical lately.
Mhm.
Well, again, thank you, Skip. It's been a great time on the snug here.
Absolutely. It felt
Harold,
like 15 minutes to tell you. I'm shocked to see what time it is. I think my wife and daughter are waiting for me to go cook dinner for them now. I do
I'll let
most of the
you do
cooking
that.
at home.
I don't want to keep you from them, but we'll keep in touch. And
Not a problem. Absolutely. Again, thank you very much. Good luck with everything. Thank you very much for your support of my podcast and everything you do for me. And let's get the tunes to the people, brother.
yep, and y'all out there, if you listen to this, tune into Empty Pockets. It's worth the time. Thanks.
Thanks, bud.